Dharma. या देवी सर्वभूतेषु शक्तिरूपेण संस्थिता नमस्तस्यै 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 नमो नमः ॐ महामाये जगन्मातः कालिके घोरदक्षिणे गृहाणवन्दनं देवी नमस्ते परमेश्वरी ॐ नमस्ते परमेश्वरी ॐ ग्रहणावन्दनं माता सदा विजयवर्धिनिः पादपद्मं सदा वन्दे स्थानं देहि पदाम्बुजे ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ तत्सत्. Salutations to that goddess who abides in all beings in the form of power. Salutations to Mahamayi, the great confoundress. Salutations to that mother of the entire universe. Salutations to the awe-inspiring, terrifying Kali. O Mother, victory always to you. You who are the mother of all, keep me forever at thy lotus feet. I forever pray to thy lotus feet. Om, peace, peace, peace. Kalikaye vidmahe smashanavasinye dhimahi tanno ghore prachodayat. May that dweller in the cremation ground, Kali, illumine my mind. Om Jai Thakur, Jai Ma, Jai Swamiji. Good evening, one and all. This is a very important period, the next 14 or so days, because on the new moon, the coming new moon, we're going to be celebrating Amavasya, but a special Amavasya, special new moon Kali worship. It's called the Shyama Kali Puja. So of all the new moons in the year, this is one of the most important new moons for Mother Kali. There are, of course, astrological reasons for why this should be so. And this would include like all manner of dark feminine deities. So whether it's Lilith or Hecate or any tradition that offers a version of the goddess that you might call the winter goddess or devouring goddess, which, as you know, is one aspect of an overall understanding of that which creates and that which destroys, which is one and the same reality, consciousness. But that aspect, specifically that Kali aspect, is celebrated in this coming new moon. So the 14 days leading up to this Amavasya, Chase, good to see you, brother. Jaima, Jaima, Prabhu, Jaima. So these 14 days leading up to that Amavasya is called the Kali Krishna Paksha. So Krishna, not to, be conflated with the deity named Krishna. Krishna just means dark or black. So the Krishna Paksha means the waning fortnight. But of course you can add Krishna there too, because as you know, Kali and Krishna are one and the same. But in any case, Krishna Paksha, the waning fortnight of the moon, that dwindling energy, that darkening of the moon, is of course especially important for these fierce cremation ground type spirits like Kali, Bhairava, etc. So the Ghora Shaktis, the fierce energies of the tradition, this is what we're venerating in the next 14 days. So this is called the Kali Krishna Paksha, the waning fortnight of Kali, because every day brings us closer to that empowering and important moment when Mother is worshipped in the dark moon. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, the camera was pinned. Okay, here I am. But there I am also. And where am I that I am not? For one and only one exists, and that is what we call Kali. So venerating Kali, and thank you for that. Venerating Kali on the new moon is something we prepare for. We ease into the worship of Kali, especially in this terrible aspect. So these next 14 days are all about immersing in that energy, which will culminate with the Shyama Kali Puja. So necessarily then, I want to turn our attention now to all things Kali Puja related. In this Puja class, we're discussing how to worship Ma Kali, but of course there's so many things that we do before we even come to the worship of Mother Kali. There's like a whole slew of preliminary practices in order to purify the body and the mind and the speech and the space around us, to purify the internal and external instruments. There's that very complicated process called Bhuta Shuddhi, where we meditate on consciousness, and arguably we meditate as consciousness to recognize that that which is being worshipped in the puja, in the ritual, is none other than the act of worshipping and the worshipper itself. So the trinity of knower, knowing, and known are collapsed into the one reality, which we call consciousness, or which we call whatever deity you're worshipping. So that deity is one and the same with the self. That principle, Advaitic principle, central principle of non-dual traditions, that's recognized in Bhuta Shuddhi. And of course, as you know, we've recently finished a discussion on the Nyasas, a very complex process of working with linguistic mysticism and mapping the phonemes of the Sanskrit alphabet onto the various parts of the body, as it were to construct a mantric body, a body of sound and resonance, a pure body of vibration, which can then interact with the very pure vibrations which we are working with in the context of the puja. So all of that's already happened, and now we're entering into the section called Panchopachara Puja, the 5-item worship of a slew of divinities that we tend to worship before we approach Kali. So we start with the Guru, we get the Guru's blessing by doing the Guru Puja. Then Ganesh, in some traditions we begin with Ganesh actually because the recognition of the body as being the arena in which all spirituality is practiced. Ganesh as past karmas, as the Mooladhara Chakra, etc. etc. So you start with the Guru, you then worship Ganesh. In some traditions you do a worship of a slew of deities called the Panchadevatas. This has a Smarta Brahmin background, where you worship maybe Shiva, as one of the Vedic gods, Rudra that is. And then you worship Narayana, Vishnu, along with Saraswati and Lakshmi. Then of course, you'll worship Surya or Agni and certainly Durga. These are the 5 divinities. And sometimes, by the way, Ganesh is included in that list and Agni is dropped. So that list of 5 will change from tradition to tradition. But then having worshipped those 5, we then go on to worship maybe the 9 planets, the 10 directional deities, etc. etc. So as you know, our puja class is now interested in that section, worshipping these deities, starting with the Guru and going through a whole slew of deities until we reach Kali. And then as we worship Kali, we then will start to worship her retinue. So it's not just that Mother Kali is worshipped, the entire chakra is worshipped, the emanation of Mother Kali, which flows out as these 15 points of the triangles, the 5 triangles that surround the Bindu. I'm speaking now of her yantra. And of course the 8 petals of the lotus flower that surround that central figure of the 5 triangles with the dot. That will have a series of deities in the middle of the petal, at the base of the petal, at the end of the petal. So you get like 3 deities per each petal, which means you get like 3 sets of 8. So the first set would be the Ashtamatrikas, and then their Bhairava consorts, and then the Bhairavis. Like that, you flow out from the center, and you worship all these peripheral deities, as it were, recognizing them to be, although many, rooted in the one, which we call the Bindu, which is Kali. And then, of course, you can worship Bhairava as the consort of Kali. So even though we recognize that all the divinities are one, still, we recognize that the flavors of that one can differ from divinity to divinity. So we're acknowledging each of those flavors. And of course, Bhairava is worshipped, Sadashiva is worshipped, and then often we conclude everything with a Jackal Puja and Uchishta Chandalini Puja, Panchamakaras, etc. But the thing to note here is that Kali, I should say it in a more modern context, Kali is a vibe. She's a flavor. There's a particular flavor to Mother's Puja. And that's what we're going to enter into together in the next 14 days. Quite tangibly, hopefully, many people will feel the days are becoming shorter. And just last night, after the sun set, I had this wonderful sense that it was darker than it had been for a long time. Although it's nighttime, the sun sets every night, but there was a deeper sense of darkness. The depth of last night's night was more considerable. And I go to the Smashan pretty much all the time, but it feels different now. Yesterday when I was there, there's something different there. There's the palpable sense. Maybe for those who are sensitized to it, but I would argue that very rarely is a person who isn't sensitive to the changing of the seasons, and that change of moving into the autumn, moving into the winter, it corresponds to feeling this destructive power, which is a liberating power, which is one and the same as the creation power, except with a slightly different emphasis. So I want to talk about Kali Puja now. I'm going to just skip ahead if you don't mind. I'm going to skip all the Panchadevatas and some of the auxiliary deities. We'll come back to that later. Let's just come into the Kali Puja just to empower each and every one of you to do a worship of Mother Kali according to your own capacity and interest, especially on the new moon night, but perhaps on all the various nights leading up to that moment. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question, what if you're in the southern hemisphere as opposed to the northern hemisphere? Would this seasonal point change? Maybe, but I don't think so. I think even if it's the spring now, if you're entering into the spring, astrologically speaking, it's still going to be important that we worship Mother Kali. This is the day that we worship Mother Kali. It could be arbitrary. Maybe the day is just set and therefore it becomes sacred because we make it sacred. But we could argue that actually there are some perhaps astrological reasons or various other factors that make this day Kali's day. We argue every day is Kali's day, but sometimes, some seasons, some days are more Kali, arguably, or more palpably Kali, if I can use that language at all. Okay, so now let's talk about Kali Puja. How are we going to perform Ma Kali's Puja? And every year we do this. Every year around the time of Kali Puja, we offer sort of introductions to Ma Kali's Puja, and so simple puja breakdowns and whatnot. But before I get into any of that, I want to make some subtle points, some Advaita points. I want to talk about worshipping Ma Kali as pure non-dual consciousness, without any of the ritual paraphernalia, without any of the mantras or the visualizations or any of that stuff you would consider Anavapaya. Now, I will take this up more seriously in the next class. So in the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra class, we define Bhairava as the bliss of one's own innate being or the inner experience. So anything that arises arises within this field, a field of consciousness, which is actually all pervasively whole and one. There's no sense in which the subject and object can be divided. There's no such sense in which one subject and another subject can be divided. At least no real sense in which any demarcations in consciousness can be seen. With that said, that one field of consciousness, which I am, which you are, which alone is, that is Bhairava. And of course, we define Kali, is very important, as the energy of that Bhairava to shapo, jnana, chasankyam, turiyam, iti gati nado, iti kramat. She is that energy which projects the world, in which the world is experienced, which defines and delimits the world. In other words, which sculpts the world into something, which maintains the world, and importantly, which in a sequence then devours the world. Kali kala sankarshini iti abhidhiyate, hence she is called the devourer. She is the one who imagines the world also, kalanam, making a kind of idealistic point about the ontological status of the world as being in mind, as opposed to being external to mind. So all of that is what Kali is, and arguably here she's described in this very refined Advaitic way as the energy of Bhairava. And Bhairava here is defined as consciousness. So there's a non-dual way to do all of this, which I argue is a very subtle way to do the practice, to approach the tradition, and that's what the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra is all about. So we'll get into that. But let me just start with that, if you don't mind, and then enter into some of the ritual things, because I think there's an important point that we have to make about the rituals, which requires a little bit of grounding in this piece first, in Kali as pure non-dual consciousness. But I'll start with this. When we talk about the worship of Mother Kali, we should ask this question. This is the first question we ought to ask. Where are you getting all of this from? Like, why is it that we say mantras in this way? Why is it that we offer the items in this particular order? Why this mudra and not some other mudra? Like, doesn't it all feel so arbitrary? Do we just like come up with a bunch of things to do and then entertain ourselves with that in some like existentialist sense to make meaning of this absurd, meaningless universe? Like, are we making this stuff up? That's a very important question to ask. And it's a worthy and valuable question because it's a very intricate system. There's a very specific procedure as to what to do and how to do it. This is where I will say many people misunderstand Vamachara or Kaula Marga. People with no discipline and with no ritual acumen come to Kaula Marga, and then they hear there's no such thing as pure or impure. They hear that like God is all pervasive and all present, and therefore they stop caring about rituals, and more importantly, they stop caring about ritual precision. They're not interested anymore to learn how to do ritual. So just the other day I was listening to some music in the car. I was like thinking about metal music, like heavy metal music. I was like, Kaula Marga type pujas are exactly like that. They're full of ferocity and power, and that's their value. But wait, this is important. For the ferocity to come through, some virtuosity is needed. Haven't you noticed? Like, heavy metal music is incredibly virtuosic. It's incredibly disciplined. And you could even argue it's just classical music with electricity. And that's what we say. We say our tradition is just classical tantra, just dakshinachara with electricity, with the power of Kali, which of course makes us all mad and ecstatic worshippers of Ma, but that doesn't make us sloppy pujaris. That's an important point. It's one thing to be drunk. It's quite another thing to be so drunk that you don't know how to perform the puja or you slur your mantras. Like the test of a Kaula Marga practitioner is no matter how many, I would argue, transgressive substances they've ingested, it will never diminish their ability to perform puja because those things serve the puja, just as the puja serves those things. Like the point here is to perform a worship to Mother Kali, no matter how transgressive it can get. And of course, Mother Kali is transgression incarnate. Her puja is necessarily going to be left-leaning. It's even in her dhyana mantra. Lambika Chochayam, her hair falls over to the left. To the right, presumably because she's stepping to the left. Dakshina Vyapi, Mukta Lambika Chochayam. So there's no way, I would argue, I shouldn't say no way, but it's hard to approach Kali without these elements of the Kaulachara or the Vamachara. She is the quintessential Vamachara deity. Even when she's named Dakshina Kali, you can't quite get away from the Vamachara symbolism. But notice this, just because it's left-leaning, just because it's Vamachara, doesn't mean, this is very important, doesn't mean there isn't ritual precision, doesn't mean there isn't a sophistication in how we perform the worship. And so you'll find that the difference between the Vamachara and the Dakshinachara, maybe the left hand and the right hand, the difference between transgressive tantra or goddess tantra versus more orthodox tantra is not in complexity or in sophistication or in refinement. It's just again, it's not in rules or no rules, it's in which rules. You see, there are still rules, just different rules. And therefore we have to ask, where are we getting this? Like if you want to throw all the rules out the window and say these are all fake, like this whole thing is just a vikalpa, just a mental projection to superimpose some meaning on a meaningless universe, then it's fair that you would stop doing rituals altogether because you no longer see value in them, and then you just approach God in this like kind of guileless and sweet way, which is fine. And this is a thing that they often use to describe Sri Ramakrishna. They say, oh, Sri Ramakrishna, he didn't really do any sadhana. I mean, like the way he attained Ma was through sincerity of feeling. He attained Ma through sheer yearning. Like he just wanted Ma so badly, and that's how he got his darshana of Ma. And it was only then that he got his tantric guru and he practiced the 64 Bhairava Agamas so that he could be a world teacher. So he didn't need any of these rituals or practices. He had to realize Ma through his own pure longing, and then these rituals and practices came after so he could help others. But that's not a good way of describing Sri Ramakrishna's journey. I don't think that's an honest narrative. It's true, it's sincerity of purpose alone that matters, but that's usually given expression in ritual positions. So to say that Sri Ramakrishna attained Mother Kali just through crying about it, I think it's not fair to him because he very diligently performed ritual worship in like a public temple that served the public. Like he learned how to do the very puja that we're going to learn how to do now, more or less. Of course, things have changed a little bit and we're modifying the Padhati. And as years go on, the Padhati changes hands, adds elements, removes elements. But more or less, you're learning to perform the puja with the same implements, with the same offerings, and more or less, I would argue 90% the same mantras that Sri Ramakrishna himself would have used. I mean, to me, that's a stunning point. That like we are doing the ritual more or less that Sri Ramakrishna himself did to Mother Kali. And you'll notice it's a very complex ritual, and Sri Ramakrishna notoriously was known for having mastered it very quickly, and he really took to it. So before he realized Mother Kali in that dramatic way of like seeing the light and saying Ma and then being illumined from that point onwards, it's important to point out that he had a puja guru, probably his older brother, Ram Kumar, but also this other family guru that actually probably also initiated Sarada Devi, a kind of guru that was known to the community. His name was K. Bhattacharya. Kenaram Bhattacharya, and Bhattacharya ji gave Sri Ramakrishna his Kali mantra. I mean, it's argued that that's all he did, just gave Sri Ramakrishna the Kali mantra, and then Sri Ramakrishna learnt puja from the temple authorities, mainly his older brother, who was the head priest of the temple at that time. But where he learned puja, I think, is beside the point. He learned puja, and he really learned the hell out of it. Like we were saying a few lectures ago, he like was really virtuosic. But what made him virtuosic was not only his deep reverence for the structure and system of puja, like his ability to like really do the procedure to the T. But what made him virtuosic arguably was the fury with which he performed his puja. It wasn't kind of sedate and quiet and like, just flipping pages and saying mantras for the sake of doing those things. He didn't see puja as an end. He saw puja as a means to connect to the divine, to channelize his love. So the way that he expressed his sincerity, his yearning and his love was through a very complex ritual procedure that he mastered to the T. So I'm going to make the case that Sri Ramakrishna realized Kali through Tantra even before he met his Tantric Guru. Because prior to Bhairavi Brahmani, who is argued to be his Tantric Guru, you guys, he had Tantric Gurus, like Kenaram Bhattacharya, Ram Kumar. He lived and worked in a Tantric temple where the deity who was worshipped is the quintessence of Tantra, Kali. So having performed Kali Puja, Sri Ramakrishna had a vision of Kali. And that's why learning Kali Puja is really worth it, because in our tradition we see evidence of this, where Kali Puja is a valid means for realizing Kali. That might be enough to take it seriously. Like, it's enough to see other people try something and succeed with it for us to say maybe I ought to try it too. Like, we don't have to ask where does it come from, is it real? It's instrumentally true. We can see how it works in people's lives. We can see how it gives a turn to devotion, to sincerity, to love, and therefore we say, yeah, I think I will take the trouble to learn it. And my God, it can be a trouble. It can be a pain. It's difficult. That's why I just want to give you a disclaimer, because it requires a lot of background understanding, a lot of acumen, like intellectual acumen, a lot of executive function. I think that's the main thing. The reason why we sometimes struggle with puja is because we struggle with executive function, actually. What to say of discipline? It's hard to like just get our shit together, like get all the things in the right place, organize our drawers and things like that. So it's hard to find the implements for puja when we need them. That's one of the challenges. The first challenge in puja is we realize like how sloppy we are as people. And puja itself requires such a high level of precision that we have to fix that. That's the exciting thing. There's a difficulty to it, but that difficulty is made more manageable by the promise of it, like what there is to be gained from it. So when we see people like Sri Ramakrishna and Ramprasad and Komalakanta, look, these are all people that history says are artlessly, guilelessly yearning for God and attaining God through prayer alone. But that is not, I think, a fair reading of history. These were all serious sadhakas. Ram Prasad all night long would do japa on a corpse. Like, he offered wine, he did the Panchamakars, he performed the full Kali puja. He would chant in a bone mala by some accounts. There's a book in Bengali, I've not read it in Bengali, I've seen an English translation, called Sadhak Ram Prasad. And there it like walks you through some legendary accounts, but more or less like what you would expect to find in a very serious tantric practitioner. Corpses, smashan, late at night, bone japa, chanting malas, lakhs and lakhs and lakhs to Ma Kali. Like, just all that sadhana, the daily puja of Kali. One thing about Ram Prasad that I really love, and we talked about this 2 years ago, I'll probably bring it up again this time, is he loved to celebrate Kali Puja in a big way. This one that's coming up, Shyama Kali Puja, it's also Diwali, So he would invite everyone in the town. And people love to come to his pujas because, unlike the priest in their local temples, he performed puja with so much force, so much flavor and feeling and meaning that people really felt Kali's presence. Of course, he knew Kali. So if you want to see Kali, you should go hang out with those people who have direct access to her. So she was there, in the room. And he would do this. And it was said that he was very jovial and fun-loving and warm and welcoming. So when people would come to the puja, he would usually greet them at the door. He would chat with them a little while. He was like a good host. It's interesting. And then he would sit and do the worship, and when he was performing the worship, he would be totally absorbed. Now, there's a very poignant moment towards the end of his life, the last day of his life, his last night of his life. Things were different. He invited everyone over for the Kali Puja, but he himself was not his usual extroverted, warm, jovial self. He was kind of indrawn, and people noticed this change, and he worshipped with a special intensity. And that morning, it's an all-night worship, as some of you will soon discover. That morning, as the sun is rising, we take the gata and immerse it. Sometimes it's the Saturday after, but sometimes right away. So they go and they immerse Kali. It is said, and of course this is where history or fact becomes legend, it is said that Ram Prasad was so filled with divine fervor that when they went to immerse the gata, he sang a song and with the gata went into the Ganga. He immersed with Ma and was never seen again. He was reabsorbed into the stream of Indian spirituality for his songs to continue to echo throughout the tradition. So he, of course, is a very important figure, Ram Prasad, one of the greatest worshippers of Ma Kali of all time. And we know that because Sri Ramakrishna looked upon Ram Prasad as his ideal and hero in some sense. Because Sri Ramakrishna didn't compose his own songs, except for maybe improvising lines here and there in a popular Bengali kirtan convention, like Harinam kind of thing where you compose lines. Except for those spontaneous moments of improvisation, Sri Ramakrishna never seriously composed music. Isn't that interesting? He preferred to sing other people's songs, but only those songs which he had a natural affinity for. So particularly Ram Prasad, he loved. He loved Ram Prasad songs. And as far as Shyama Sangeet is concerned, of course Komalakanta and all the various Bengali musicians are included, but Ram Prasad especially. There's something about the way that Ram Prasad related to Ma, or the way that he realized Ma, that resonated with the Sri Ramakrishna. So you could even argue that Ram Prasad is to use Swami Ambikaranda's phrase, in the same bhavik lineage as Sri Ramakrishna. I like that idea. I think that's an exciting idea, that Ram Prasad and Sri Ramakrishna, although they're not maybe part of the same lineage as such, they're in the same bhavik lineage. And we, all of us here today, are inheritors of that bhavik lineage. And let us never get the impression that it was devoid of rigor, devoid of precision. Although it's Vamachara, it's Kaulachara in one sense, it's strict, it's precise, and that's what we're here to learn regarding Kali Puja. So I think it's nice to look at Sri Ramakrishna, or look at Ram Prasad, or look at Vivekananda, or Sri Sarada Devi. It's good to look at the people who have done this before us and performed these pujas, and just notice the change in their lives. Of course, it's very easy here because all around us we have living proof of what puja does to people. We have Usha Ma, Elizabeth Harding at the Kali Mandir. We have Swamis Bhajan Anandaji and Ambika Anandaji, who have been performing Kali Puja for 33 years now, at least in a serious way, at the Kali Mandir. We have Nandu, who from Kerala came and taught everyone so much back in the day. We saw what Nandu was, we saw all these things. And of course, above all, we could argue Haridan Chakravarti, who is actually marrying into Sri Ramakrishna's family. So he married into the family and became the head priest at at the Dakshineshwar Kali temple, where Sri Ramakrishna himself worshipped Mother Kali. And then he would come here every year and perform this big Kali Puja down in Laguna Beach. And you could see his ecstasy. And you can even hear, now on Bandcamp, the Kali Mandir in Laguna Beach has recordings of this great pujari worshipping Ma. And you can just feel the fervor and the presence. So having seen people who have done puja, the kind of puja that we're learning now, and having seen the transformation in them, and more importantly, having attended puja, a real powerful puja where the pujari is really connected to that which she is worshipping, pujarini or pujari, then you can't deny it. You can't deny the power of puja. Just experientially, by testimony, one is encouraged, affirmed, assuaged. But now comes an even more important point. Is that the only kind of certainty we can have? It works, therefore it's true? Is it only an instrumental certainty? We say no, we can have more certainty. We can go further. And I don't know if we can even accept this as going further. This might be enough for us. Experience is the best test of fact. But we say, what makes these rituals what they are is the direct revelation of God, which some would argue is less certain than experience. But in some traditions, like this has the highest authority. So before we get into the puja, like in answering this first question, where do we get all these rules? Like, where do these mantras come from? Where do these procedures come from? Why are these items offered in this particular way, etc., etc.? To answer that question, we say, all of this is presented in a series of texts known as the Tantras. They are proclaimed by Lord Shiva, often Lord Shiva to Parvati, and sometimes even Parvati or Bhairavi, Shakti to Lord Shiva in some of these nigamas. But in these agamas, in these nigamas, in these tantras, we have these compendiums of mantras and specific ritual instructions as to how to employ them to evoke the energy and presence of Mother Kali. Both invoke and evoke the energy and presence of Mother Kali. So it works in one sense because it's been tried and tested and seen to work, but it's also working because it's presented as a whole systematic and effective structure and system to attain this desired end. So there's a basis for all of this, and they're called the Tantras. And this is very important because in this day and age especially, it seems like we're not that interested in scriptural rigor. So it seems like anybody anywhere can just say whatever they want about puja, or they can define Kali or yoga or tantra in any way that they want, and then we're just like all of us forced to accept that. Just maybe out of good faith, we're like, yeah, they, if they're Indian, maybe that's even worse because then we feel like maybe they have more authority. Or if they have a nice beard or something or a good turban, they can just say whatever they want. Like, we wouldn't know better. And so we assume that we're not being deceived. And I don't think they're even out to deceive us necessarily. But it is important that, for our own safety, for our own rigor, and especially since we're going to invest so many hours in this, we should ask, where are they getting it from? Even though they're speaking with such certainty, that doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves are certain, or that even if they are certain, what they're saying is certain, right? You can speak with certainty and be certain, but you can also speak with certainty and be uncertain. And many of us are like that. It's like we put on a show, a pretense of speaking with authority about things that we actually know very little about. Because what do we know really? And that's an important point. There's also a world in which you speak with certainty about things which you are certain about, but you're simply mistaken because those things themselves have no certainty. So I think, epistemologically speaking, as a community, we have to ask this question, epistemologically. How do we know? And why should we follow? How do we know? Why should we care? I mean, we should care because we can see its effect in people's lives, but that could just be a placebo, that could just be something. So how do we get certainty? And we would argue the certainty comes from a system of peer-reviewed, corroborated texts known as the agamas, the nigamas, the tantras, and things can only be presented insofar as they do not contradict that which is said in those tantras. That's a very important point. And of course, there's some scriptural complexity here too, because maybe the tantras themselves internally, intertextually contradict one another. And then it becomes a matter of selection. You have to justify those selections. It becomes a matter of harmonization, a matter of interpretation. So all of that is important too. You cannot get rid of the role of the human interpreter. In other words, the guru. Like the guru is always going to be required to make sense of the text, but not to replace the text. The texts are the highest authority. So the first thing we have to say is that Mother Kali is the highest authority, and the texts are here by her will, and the genuine religious claim that is made in this tradition is that the texts themselves represent Mother Kali's instruction to us for how to realize her. Arguably, it's Lord Shiva's instruction to us for how to realize Kali, who is the heart of Shiva, the essence of Shiva. So we can bullshit all we want, and often we do, especially in neo-pagan reconstruction communities. Like, it's a lot of it is just, it's sincere, it's coming from a beautiful and intuitive place, but it can be very ungrounded and without any accountability. And that's where you get like cults and stuff. Because if you tell people to do something, and you sincerely feel like they should do it, they will sincerely do it. And then maybe we're all just deluding each other, and then we end up doing ridiculous things that we cannot reasonably like defend. So we say the first and foremost safeguard, and I've made this point in many other places, the first and foremost safeguard is the tantra itself, the text, the scripture. So just recently, I was talking to somebody and he's in a bit of a pickle because his guru tells him to do X, but he can't find a scriptural basis for it. So he's not sure whether or not this action X or this puja X or this sadhana X is actually based, so to speak, to use modern language. So he was asking me, what should I do? Should I throw it out because it's not in the scripture, or should I accept it because it's my guru vak? It's like the word of my guru that does not trump everything. Like he was in a bit of a pickle. So I went to my guru about it. I was like, actually, Baba, I don't know. Let me go ask my guru. So I went to my guru and I asked him, I said, so I have this person, this is his predicament. And my Guru Deva laughed and he said, well, he should have chosen a better guru. That way he wouldn't have ended up in the predicament. And my Guru Deva had a point because according to our scripture, there are very clear metrics about how to choose a spiritual teacher. Is it someone who has a large following? God forbid. Good PR doesn't make a good guru. Not that a big following disqualifies anybody. It's just we have to be very careful that we don't conflate a big following with good instruction. That's one thing. Because, you know, a person with a big following might be a really good show person, but that doesn't make them a good guru. They might be very charismatic and very convincing, and they might be doing a lot of good in the world, but that doesn't qualify them to be a guru by the standards of this tradition. Therefore, we have to ask, what does the tradition itself define as a guru? What makes a guru? The first word we get in this verse, Shrotriya Avarjana Akamahata, the first word there in the definition of guru is Shrotriya. Isn't that interesting? Shrotriya means a knower of scripture. But like I've argued in other places when we had this conversation, that what it means to know the scripture is to honestly and reasonably represent them without getting lost in some like overly intellectual, text torturing kind of exegetical thing, and to live them. But more importantly, to direct our students to them. So like the claim is that the teacher, the true teacher, has to have some system of accountability, and that is the scripture. So what the teacher says should only be accepted insofar as it can be cited, or insofar as it doesn't. We say this at least. Even if it doesn't directly appear in the text, it at least shouldn't contradict the text. That's at least that, you know. It shouldn't go against what is claimed in the text. So Shrotriya, that's like the first thing, you know, like that defines a guru. And so now our role in learning Kali Puja is to ourselves become to some degree Shrotriyas. We have to acquaint ourselves with this hoary tradition, with this age-old lineage in which the texts are preserved, the living transmission is handed down, and we are trying to stay we're trying to have integrity and stay true to the tradition. So therefore, in this community, above all, we emphasize rigor. For far too long, people on the internet have been able to say whatever they want, representing Hinduism, representing Tantra, and they've been allowed to define Tantra and Kali however they want. And I don't doubt that it's coming from a good place. It's just really muddied the waters. It's created so many superstitions and so much fear-mongering that it doesn't really help anyone, except maybe to get them interested in the beginning. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in doing this in the traditional way, which means a reverence, a deep reverence for the texts, for the scriptures. So insofar as we're doing this puja, we have to acknowledge that its roots perhaps can be found in the Malini Vijaya Uttara Tantra, which of course can be found online and can be purchased, and also a text known as the Jayadratha Yamala Tantra. Those of you who come visit here, when you come over next, I'll show you, we have an OG copy, like a hardcover, not hardcover, sorry, hard copy. So you can see that Tantra Raja Bhattarika, it's called, or like Tantra Raja, is the main Tantra arguably for Makali, which Abhinava Gupta uses along with the Malini Vijaya Uttara Tantra to present this system. But not only that, there's the Vama Keshvara Mata Tantra too, which presents Shri Vidya, a very complex system of mantra and visualization and tantric practice, which of course in the south, the text is called, we knew it as the Nitya Shodha Shakarnava. And of course there's like another slew of tantric traditions that come in the form of the Tirumular, Tirumantiram, you know, Tirumurai, like that, those are in Tamil. Like there's all these like non-Sanskrit texts, but generally these are the texts that we consider very important. And what we're doing now is working on a padati, deriving a ritual manual based on the mantras that we find in this text. That's why you might find a little bit of variation, but more or less you should be able to trace all of these mantras to their source, and the modalities and the philosophies even behind these mantras, we should be able to trace them. That's the first point I want to make. We're going to learn Kali Puja, and these are the main tantras. The Malini Vijaya Uttara Tantra, we have the Jayadratha Yamala Tantra, sometimes called the Tantra Raja Bhattarika. But there's also the Vamakeshvari Mata, which can also be called the Nitya Shodha Shikarnava Tantra. Okay, not to get overly academic with you, I just want to cite my sources and then like maybe I'll put those in the chat. There are of course other texts too. And so, for instance, in our Padati, towards the end, after we finish the worship of Mother Kali, you'll see there's a stava, a hymn. That hymn actually comes from the Mahanirvana Tantra, which is actually a more modern tantra, actually. There's actually a lot of debate about the authenticity of that tantra, which I think is fair too. You can also question authenticity of scriptures. Like that's perfectly legit. But generally we say if a scripture has been commented on enough times, if it's survived throughout the years, if it's been copied and transmitted enough times, and if more or less we can look in the scripture and compare it to other scriptures and see that it has some kind of scriptural integrity, we can reasonably expect it to be legit, as much as they can be legit anyway. So having said all of that, we're going to learn a puja, and the puja, I'm going to argue, is based. And it's Kali herself, arguably, that is telling us how she likes to be worshipped. So the first point we can make about Kali Puja is this: we don't do it how we want. Let's just put it that way. If you want to be a true pujari for Mother Kali, it's time you stop seeing puja as a means to your own ends. It's no longer something that you do for your own spiritual growth. Give up the idea that you're performing puja to grow or to transform or to become spiritually perfect. Stop doing puja for things. Arguably, the bhava that we encourage is doing puja to please Mother Kali. Puja because it's for her. So it's a means not to my end, but to her ends. And now you might ask the question, why would the goddess of the universe, who is bliss itself, Sadanandamai, need to be pleased? Does she require us to worship her? No, but just because she doesn't need it doesn't mean she doesn't like it. And that's where we come into the next point we have to make. We personalize Kali because Kali is a person. And one of the greatest non-dual teachers, I would say, of all time, if not just of our time, Swami Vivekananda once confided in a small group of Western disciples this fact. He said, I'm sure of it. I'm convinced of it. In this world, there is a power that considers itself female. That power, he means, is Kali. So Kali, and then he said, right after that, he said, I'm sure of it, I'm convinced of it. In this world, there is a power. He's not speaking in philosophical terms. This world is itself the power of consciousness, appearing to itself as a vimarsha, as a reflection of its own self-reflexive ahambhava. He could speak in that language, but he's not using philosophical language. He's speaking with the pathos of personal experience. And he's saying that in this world, like in this life, there is a power. Speaking as if it's an external force. There is a power. And this is where it gets really interesting. What makes a person a person? Is it a body? Is it traits, personality traits? Is it attributes? Yeah, maybe all of those things. But foundationally, fundamentally, personhood, like personality, is not defined by traits or body or form even. It's defined by, if nothing else, self-reflexivity. How about that? The thing that makes a person is the ability to cognize their own self, which is included in the idea of consciousness. As long as I am conscious, I know that I am conscious. There's a self-reflexivity to consciousness. We have to appreciate this point because that's what makes us, us. Without getting into any philosophical idea of the one self that inheres in all bodies as all bodies, even now, even considering myself to be a discrete unit, a person, a single person in a world with other people, I still can't deny that foundationally what it means to be me is for there to be something it's like to be me. That's a subtle point. What it means to be me is for there to be something it's like to be me. Sometimes that's happiness, sometimes that's sorrow, sometimes that's excitement, sometimes that's boredom, sometimes that's the taste of chocolate, sometimes that's hunger, sometimes it's sleepiness, sometimes it's alertness. Whatever the experience is, the fact that I am having that experience makes me a person. I am a person because I have first person, subjective experience. Right? So I always know that I am. Even while I know things like the taste of coffee or the sound of the bus horn or something. Even while cognizing things, and yes, you're absolutely right here, this idea of metacognition, Adelina. Metacognition is like, even while I smell the coffee taste the coffee or smell the coffee or hear the dog barking, I'm also, on a meta level, cognizing my own existence. And we would argue that in the absence of all cognitions, in the lieu of all sensory input or all mental projections, there is a subtle, consistent, uninterrupted flow of I amness. That metacognition never leaves me because it's inherent to consciousness. Consciousness, the cognizer. And this is what makes a person. A person is a person when it knows itself. And I'm a person because I know myself, but I consider myself to be distinct maybe from, say, Kalidasi, who is another person who knows herself. And of course, later in the next class, we'll point out that distinction doesn't actually truly hold. But philosophy and metaphysics and absolute truth aside, in the way that it feels to be in this world, in the fact of our experience, in the relative domain of life, it does feel like I'm over here, I'm this person, experiencing this body and mind. Even if I say I, the conscious being, am not the mind body in which am not the mind and body which I'm experiencing, even then I can't deny that on some level I'm having a different experience than you, or like I feel myself to be here, you're there. There are very subtle arguments to dismiss all of these, and we'll do that in the next class. But for now, I just want to stay with this felt sense of being a discrete individual. So what is my individuality? This is the point. My individuality fundamentally is my self-reflexive sense. And so look at what Swamiji is saying. I'm convinced, I'm paraphrasing the quote a little bit, but it's more or less this. So I'm convinced that there is a power. And by power, it already implies some agency, some freedom. There is a free and potent being that is a being, considers itself a person, considers itself a being. But what kind of being? Now he makes a gendered point. Here's where things get really weird. What is a woman? Like, what exactly is a woman? It's a profound contemplation, actually, because I don't think the answer can be found in biology. You know, a woman has nothing to do with genitals. Is it also in sociology? Is woman the gender called woman or female, like they put on identity cards or something, and sometimes naively enforce out of a lack of understanding of nuance? Like, no, like woman is not even the psychological being experiencing a body. So it's possible for a person to have a certain set of genitalia and then identify as a woman based on their inner experience. And it's possible for a person to identify as anything else. And like that's all valid because the psychological realm in which we have our personhood, our personality, is incredibly nuanced. So like, does Swamiji mean that there is a set of cultural or societal traits that make Kali a woman? That's why she feels like she's a woman, because she has those traits? That can't be true, because Kali is an eternal presence. So that means she exists even before society has a chance to define what a woman is. Before they can throw a baby shower where if it's a boy, everything is blue, if it's a girl, everything is pink. Before they can indoctrinate people into what they should feel like and based on their genitals, Kali exists. So Kali can't be defined as a woman based on those ever-changing, totally arbitrary and relative ideas, roles, and concepts as to what makes a woman, as to what makes a man, and as to what makes everything else, knowing that gender is a spectrum. So now the argument that's being made is that by gender, I don't think Swamiji means anything that has to do with the body, nor necessarily anything that has to do with a mind. But we can't deny that he gendered this presence. And so you could say, is this in a philosophical sense? Is this as Shakti? Because Shakti is a feminine noun. Is it Prakriti? Prakriti is also a feminine noun. Is it Devi in the sense that the names that we give to these philosophical agendered principles are grammatically gendered? Is that what he means? Maybe. But again, like I said, he might not be speaking in a philosophical context here. So I'm inviting us, if you don't mind, just for a moment to suspend our philosophical and intellectual hang-ups. I don't really know what a woman is. Who can say? I don't know what it means to be a woman. But whatever Kali is and whatever woman is, Kali is that. Make of that what you will. She is the goddess, the divine feminine. And that, of course, has a whole range of meaning, not necessarily excluding the personhood, societal roles, and the body. You know, that doesn't need to be excluded in the definition of Kali's femininity. But it's important that Swamiji points out that this being is not being in and of itself in an impersonal sense. It is a being, almost to, dare I say, distinguish this being from all other beings like Kalidasi and Kalidasa and Nish. Would there be a Kalidasi or a Kalidasa without Kali? Like, there is a Kali for Kalidasa to serve. And similarly, there is a Kali for Nish to be tortured by. There must be some being called Kali to whom we reach out when we pray. This is a basic, like, devotional idea, and it flies in the face of our refined theologies around Advaita. So we claim that there's consciousness is one. What we mean by Kali is that unitary field of non-differentiated consciousness, etc., etc. But in Advaita Vedanta, which is the argument of non-duality from the point of view of consciousness, the claim here is that this is impersonal. So this is being as such, being in and of itself. Not a being, but beingness, which allows all beings to be. Right? Like this is a very important claim. Advaita Vedanta does not recognize the personhood of God. It might recognize God as the absolute principle, but here God is not defined as the source of creation, maintenance, destruction, nor is God defined as the one who receives our prayers. That's an important distinction, actually. Yeah, it's like, as Adelina is saying, it's like a property or like a quality, but even those words might not really work. It's being in and of itself. And notice, this defies any kind of objectification that the mind can impose upon it. It's not an object. It is that by which all objects, psychical and physical, appear. That beingness, which is synonymous with consciousness. But that consciousness is not necessarily conscious. This is very important. Consciousness is not necessarily conscious. Like, there can be being, but it doesn't have to be a being. And there can be consciousness, but that doesn't mean that it's self-reflexively available to itself. It doesn't mean it's able to say, I am. According to Advaita Vedanta, you can only say I am when consciousness, as I've said in other places, comes into the contact of the mind. Only when there's a mind, which by the way ultimately is illusory, only then is consciousness reflected. And only then am I able to say, I am, I see, I hear, I taste. That innate sense of subjective experience, that's not in consciousness. It's in the mind. But the claim in the tantric non-dual world is like, no. Actually, yeah, you feel it in a contracted way in the mind. When I say I am, I only mean this. But when you take all of it together, and even when you take that which goes beyond all of it, there is this all-inclusive, purnahamta we call it, this purna, full, aham, I am, ta-ness, purnahamta. There is this sense of I amness that is intrinsic to consciousness, which makes, this is very important, consciousness a person. So if you want to argue for anything like regarding Kali, you could say she's the personhood of consciousness, the personality of consciousness, the aham bhava, the ahamtva, the purnahamta, the all, the one that can identify with everything. But even then, even that's too philosophically reified, you could say. Simply put, Sri Ramakrishna's disciple Swami Vivekananda just referred to her as a being who is aware of itself and thinks of itself as a woman, who maybe isn't a woman but likes to be. Who knows? And the next claim is where it gets so crazy. Like the next claim is what should really like make you mad. It should excite you. Like it should like obsess you actually. Because if you are at all attracted to this Kali, whatever the fuck it is, woman or what, I don't know. But if you are attracted to this Kali, this next claim is the promise that sets us like bloodhounds on a scent. And it's this, right? So I just want you to know, Swamiji's point, I don't know what it means, because we know the complexities of gender. Like, is it grammatical gender? Is it natural gender? Is it in the body? Is it in the mind? Is Kali innately gendered, or does she just like present as a woman? We don't know this, but he did say, this is very important, before we project our own ideas onto Kali, it's very important. He said, and if we want to take his anecdote seriously, again, that's up to us, but he said that I'm convinced, this is his Siddhanta, you could say, his final conclusion, or one of his ultimate conclusions as a result of a lifelong practice, and more importantly, as a result of learning from Sri Ramakrishna. He's claiming that there is this being who considers itself a woman, whatever the word woman means, so she's definitively female, at least right now, as per Swamiji's claim. Yeah, there's a beautiful story actually in Sri Ramakrishna. There's like in the Katamrita, there's a story of like they all go to see a Kali, and that Kali has a sacred thread, and they're like, oh, but isn't Kali a goddess? And they're like, oh, I don't know if she's a man or a woman, so I just put the thread. The thread usually goes on a male body, so the person put the thread on Kali just to imply her gender fluidity. And in India, I mean, this is like the first place, arguably politically even, that recognized a third gender. Like not just gender non-binary, but like a trans community. Like India is one of the first places that legislated a third gender. It's like really a progressive thing to do. But naturally, India is able to do it because India is one of the places in the world that have had a long history of questioning gender. Even Arjuna in the Mahabharata, he like cross-dresses. He becomes Falguni. Falguni is Arjuna's name when he dresses as a woman. And not only that, he affects all the mannerisms of a woman and is able to become fluid between, at night he can take that on, be a man, and then in the daytime, he's arguing that gender is not in the body or in the genitals, but it might be an affect, and then both affects are available to the single individual. And then it gets even crazier with Sri Ramakrishna, where he's able to grow breasts and menstruate, just like St. Francis is able to manifest stigmata, claiming like the external body is only a reflection of the mind. So it's possible to change the gender of the body by changing the gender of the mind, because not only is gender fluid, it's subject to the powers of the mind. Like there's so much complexity and beauty around all of this. And India, I would argue, as a literary tradition, has offered some of the most sophisticated and thoughtful ways for approaching gender. You know, but that being said, I mean, Swamiji just flat out said that Kali, that there is a being, there's a power that considers itself female. But the next claim, this is where it gets really interesting, which sets us like hounds on a scent. And that power can be seen and spoken to as clearly as I am seeing and speaking to you now. This is important. We always like to imagine that we've seen Kali. And in a philosophical sense, what are we seeing if not Kali? There's nothing but Kali. If you say, sir, have you seen God? The answer should be, I'm never not seeing God. That's truth. The absolute truth is, I'm never not seeing God. Okay, be that as it may, that's absolutely true. But this is another fact. I'm not saying it's a fact that overturns the one I just mentioned. Of course, that is absolutely true. But this is also absolutely true. That this one reality, which is all things, in all things, which appears to us in every person, in every object, can also be seen and spoken to as Kali. I mean, this is the most important point, arguably, that Kali Puja is not necessarily a practice in order to like integrate philosophical principles. It is that. I've described it as that. It's not necessarily a practice to build yogic discipline or to concentrate the mind. It of course is that. But nor is it, I would even argue, simply a bhakti practice. I mean, that would be wonderful if it's just an expression of love and devotion with no end. That was the highest I argued for earlier this week. But it's also, I'm going to say, a precise, peer-reviewed, corroborated system for attaining something. And what is that? Access to the goddess. I'm just going to put it that way, access to the goddess. And for successful practice in Tantra, arguably for success in spiritual life in general, access to the goddess is the most important thing. So I'm going to say that Sri Ramakrishna continued to practice sadhanas, but first he acquired Kali, and then Kali brought him the various gurus that he needed to flesh out his sadhana, to express his spiritual life. So puja as an expression of spirituality, arguably that can continue, but Kali is the culmination of puja also. So Sri Ramakrishna performs puja, gets access to the goddess, is able to see her and speak to her as clearly as you might see and speak to somebody. And then based on that, he's able to continue. So when you meet Totapuri, like in that story, Totapuri wants to teach him Advaita Vedanta, but he has to check with his mother first. And Totapuri thinks he means his like worldly mother because he says it with such childlike conviction, like he actually has to go and talk to somebody. And so Totapuri is like, yeah, okay, go and ask your mother and see. So he goes to the temple. He goes in front of the image of Ma Kali, Dakshineshwar Kali, Bhavatarini, and asks, Ma, can I study Advaita Vedanta? And Kali says yes. And his guru, Bhairavi Brahmani, said no. His guru is like, no, you cannot study Vedanta. You'll become a dry monk. You're a bhakta. Don't study Advaita Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna didn't listen to Bhairavi Brahmani. Why? Because Kali, the goddess herself, told him he should go learn Advaita Vedanta. Now, what happens is these days, people use their intuition and deify it. But it's not intuition, it's just whim. Like our whim and our fancy, we deify that and we place our ego on the altar of God and we do whatever we want and we say, oh, I'm the guru, the inner guru. Okay, do that all you want. Go in circles all you want. I'm not interested in this community. I'm not interested in that kind of approach. Where like, oh, whatever I say is true because I'm always valid. Or whatever I experience is automatically God because I'm willing to cheapen the experience of all the sages of a 9,000-year-old tradition whose language I don't even understand. You know, like this to me is the ultimate appropriative action on behalf of Western practitioners to say that I've seen Kali, I know Kali, she speaks, she is me, speak. Like, you say that all you want, but you're still miserable. And you don't have certainty. Like, you can't transgress what the Guru says or the scriptures say unless you have access to the goddess. But what it means to have access to the goddess is defined here. Not as a faint kind of intuition, that is valid too, but here in a much more dramatic, much more real sense. You cannot deny what was told to you by Kali because it's told to you with as much conviction and certainty as you and I are speaking now. So I would argue many of us who are in this room have had such an experience in one sense, like maybe in a dream or maybe in a half dreaming state. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Like you were maybe introduced and convinced about the living presence of this divinity because maybe she somehow conveyed that to you. But notice what that's done for you. It's made you a sadhaka or sadhvi. It's made you want to practice in order to like get that again, if you will, because one experience is good, but you want to have constant access to the goddess. I'll phrase it this way. Kali Puja is a systematic practice of attaining this end, direct access to the goddess, where she can be seen and felt and spoken to as clearly as we are seeing each other and speaking to one another. And more clearly than that, Sri Ramakrishna even argued. So I think this claim that Swamiji makes is very important. Swami Vivekananda defines Kali as a power which is certain exists, which knows itself and considers itself to be a woman and can be spoken to and related to. So when we do the puja, we're saying, I'm doing it as she likes it, not as I like it. And so for that, I'm not going off of my whims, I'm going off of what the text will say. Of course, that doesn't preclude or exclude personalization. Like, of course we have to personalize the pujas. Everything that we do will be an expression of who we are, and that's just how it should be. Every puja has a flavor. But as far as possible, that flavor is an embellishment of a tradition that we are inheriting. So being able to balance spontaneous, intuitive, personal expression with rigorous tradition, whether Dakshina or Vamachara makes no difference, but rigorous scriptural precedent, I would say, that's what defines this path. The balance between spontaneity and tradition, between personalization and deference for authority and for lineage. And so Sri Ramakrishna, notice he's such a follower of his tradition, which allows him to be such an iconoclast, basing his experience, basing his claims, his innovations on experience, which never contradicts scripture, as opposed to in some whim or some fancy, which he's parading around his experience. So like direct personal realization means access to the goddess, speaking to the goddess. So Kali can be seen and spoken to, and that's why we do Kali Puja. And with this personal idea of Kali, only then we can proceed, arguably. We can only proceed, realistically, I would say, in Puja, if you are invested on a deep level in this idea that Kali is a person, she's a being, she's a special kind of being, a divine being, but a being nonetheless. You have to be willing, I think, to, for a few moments, put aside your more refined absolutist ideas of God. God is pure non-dual consciousness, which by the way we'll return to in the next Vijnana Bhairava Tantra class. We're not getting rid of them. They're there as the background of our understanding. But be that as it may, when we do Kali Puja, as far as possible, we should enter into the feeling, because it's a true feeling, it's real. We should enter into the feeling that there is this woman, a wild woman with wild hair and 4 arms, who really does look like that. Why does she look like that? Is it a philosophical symbol? Yes, I've argued that in some places, that there's a philosophical reason why we want to present her in that way, because each thing in her body represents some spiritual or philosophical idea in the tradition that we want to like symbolize. But we could also make an equally valid claim that she appears like that just because she likes to, and then we later exegetically interpret or relate the various things in her to various ideas in our philosophy. So did we make Kali in our image? Maybe. I don't deny that Kali made us and then we made her. Like, that's perfectly possible. Like, Kali projects humans and then humans project their idea of Kali. That's possible. But to take Swami Vivekananda seriously in that quote at Thousand Islands Park, maybe there is a power that understands itself and feels itself to be a woman, and maybe for her own sweet play, for her own will, she likes to like appear like this wild banshee type spirit. Like, that's just her favorite outfit, if you will. So we have to like kind of to some extent buy into that she really does look like this. And that's what invests our puja with a kind of reality. We can't look at the image and say, oh, it's just a symbol. It won't work that way, because that's not how Ram Prasad treated the symbol. That's not how Komalakanta treated the symbol. Sri Ramakrishna looked at the image and asked, are you just stone? And then he would conduct experiments. He would put like a little bit of, what do you call it, like something under her nose to see whether or not she was breathing. And lo and behold, she was breathing for him. She would eat food from his hands. Like, she was a living presence for Sri Ramakrishna. For everyone else, it was just stone. But for Sri Ramakrishna, that stone came to life. Because it was life all along, only he was able to see it. How? With this idea that there in that stone, in that image, is Mother Kali, and she does look like that, and I'm actually speaking to her. So for Kali Puja to work, you have to invest your murti and your puja with that sense. So you can't just treat it like an item in the room. It's her living presence. And this is her house. And when you walk in, you bow to her. And you speak to her the way you would speak to your mother when you come home. Or to your spouse or something. Like, you really personalize the image, knowing fully that the energy of Mother Kali is going to come through the image. It is the image, but it's also something beyond the image. And the purpose of the puja is to awaken the image so that it's no longer an image. This happened to Swami Vivekananda. How many times he had seen the image? Before his experience, when he was a young boy, it was just an image to him. But then that night, you all know the story, I don't need to get into it. But that night when Sri Ramakrishna told him to go and see Kali, because he was in financial struggle, he went, and then it was no longer an image. By Sri Ramakrishna's Leela, when he walked in, he saw, through his Guru's grace, the way he saw, like Sri Ramakrishna saw Kali, not as like stone, but as a living, breathing goddess. And he spoke to her. And he even hinted to Sister Nivedita the things that she said to him. And not imagined kind of things. Clear, like I'm speaking to you now. Does it sound imagined? I mean, like, it has a certain tangibility, this conversation that we're having, which does feel more tangible than conversations we have with ourselves in our mind. Those can always be questioned. Did I say that, or did Ma say that? And the more egocentric among us will say, oh, Ma said that. You know, discounting the fact that I have all sorts of whims and fancies and hang-ups and projections, and I always take my own will to be God's will. Like that we forget, and we take our own ideas to be Kali's ideas. Notice, that can be doubted. It can be doubted more readily and more easily than this, which also can be doubted, but this has a tangibility to it, this communication, this conversation. So too with Kali. When one experiences Kali, the conversation is as lucid as being awake and as speaking to somebody. So Sri Ramakrishna gave this experience to Vivekananda, and he later relayed it to Sister Nivedita. He was very secretive about it. He told her, actually, what happened there will go with me to my grave. But he gave some hints. And some of those hints depicted the image as speaking to him. And all night long, he sang to the image as if he was in the... And he claimed like he was like being in the court of the Queen of the universe. And he couldn't ask for money. He went there to ask for money, by the way, to help his struggling family. But he felt like it would be remiss to ask for money. He said to Thakur, I think he said to Nivedita, he claimed that to ask for money at that time would be like to ask some pumpkins or something in the presence of a great queen who could do much more. So instead of asking for the baubles and trinkets of this material world, he prayed, Mother give me bhakti, Mother give me jnana, bhaktim dehi, jnanam dehi, siddhim dehi. Those prayers that are really worth something. And arguably, after praying like this, his final experience was to go even beyond prayer, even the need to pray for spiritual things. He just sat there, and all night long, he just sang one song. Just all night singing, oh mother, you are my very own mother, my very own Tara. And this from a person who rejects Kali as being a living presence. This from a person who actually said, and I quote, how I used to hate Kali and her ways. That was his exact claim. And he was really disgusted by Indian superstition because he was, taught by the Brahmo Samaj that this was the cause for the degeneration of India, which what led to India being colonized, not just by the Mughals, but by the British. This weakness in India of like regarding its stone as being living, breathing images. What the modern reformers were calling weakness, Sri Ramakrishna saw as the real strength. The Indian mind is able to see God in the immanent. Where every tradition likes to project God into the abstract, the Indian mind is willing to like interact with the abstract on the level of the personal and the mundane. This is the heart of Indian spirituality, personalizing God and divinizing the person, making the mundane divine and the divine mundane. So your willingness to see Kali, like as being present in the image, is the prerequisite for Kali Puja. I would even say prior to that, prior to your willingness to see Kali in the image or in the yantra or in the gata, in the pot, kalasha holding the water, prior to that is your willingness to accept this idea that she is not just your abstract philosophy. She is a living, breathing, if you could say that, pulsating, throbbing energy who is a being, a person who considers herself a person, taller than you would think. And she appears and she talks and she can be evoked and invoked. And that's the purpose of puja. So when we worship her, feel like she is there in the image because she is. Because not only is she in the image, she is. That's the claim. She is. Kali is. That's how we start Kali Puja, with that first recognition or that first intuition or inkling. Some of you know because some of you understand that there's a personality to her, a flavor, some preferences, dare I say. And before you can ask, well, how can there be preferences to God? Put all that aside for a while. Like forget about God even, I would say. Just think of Kali. And Jean Jayarata now said something really powerful. He said, I don't really care about God, I only care about Kali. Huh. Now that is someone who can succeed at Kali Puja. Forget about our mental projections of what we think God is. Forget about our concepts. What we're invited to do now as practitioners is to engage with this beautiful, very human, very sweet idea that she's our mother, and not just any mother. She's a person. She's not just there for me to project qualities onto. She has her own qualities. She has her own preferences, her own being. And therefore, to understand what those preferences are, we go to the tantras. And the tantras tell us, okay, she likes to be worshipped in this way, at this time, with these items like that. So I'm going to argue that there isn't an arbitrariness to rituals. The first thing I'm trying to like prove with all of this is that there is something to it. It's not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary why we offer what we offer and why we offer what we offer. So therefore, I hope this is encouraging insofar as we're trying to learn the system. We don't want to cut corners. We don't just like make it our own thing. That's good too. But if that's what you want to do, you wouldn't be here. Like you wouldn't be interested in taking up this very difficult, I would say, and if I may say so myself, rigorous study of puja, with close reference to the primary literature. The fact that you're here implies that we're willing to do this in the way that arguably the text prescribed, arguably we're saying the way that Kali wants. So the first idea here is Kali is real. She can be contacted, seen, and spoken to, and she has her preferences. So let's worship her not the way that I want, but the way that she wants. And what Sri Ramakrishna realized, and this is where it gets interesting, is that what she wants is what I want also. And there's this like wonderful play where when Sri Ramakrishna wants to give her food, she's like, oh my God, I'm your mother. How can I eat before you eat? And in the rules, you can't eat before you give God food. God gets food first, otherwise it's Utrishta. And here comes God saying, no, I want you to eat first because as a mother, how can I partake of food before my son has had a chance to eat? So you eat it, then I will eat it. So there's this like Leela of Sri Ramakrishna eating the food and then forcing it into the image's mouth. Komalakanta, to prove the living presence of Kali in the image, actually cut her foot and blood came out. There are all these like miracles, that we hear about our saints, but they're all pointing to one thing, that the image is alive, you know? So we first cultivate that attitude by doing Kali Puja every day. You see, over time, it has that effect. Like what once was stone becomes a living, breathing entity. Like a long period of puja, if you do it every single day or at least often enough, over a period of time, you'll start to feel like, oh my God, philosophy aside, there's like a presence here. And not only you, other people will feel it too. They come into the house and they're like, yeah, there's something. They might not be able to put their finger on it, but there's a certain, maybe I can put it this way, gravitational stress to the field of all-encompassing consciousness. There is consciousness, but you feel the tangible presence, almost as if there's sunlight everywhere, but then you use a magnifying glass and that sunlight is consecrated, I almost say, but concentrated. And what is concentration? Consecration. This is the claim. Not just clever wordplay, but concentration is consecration. Because to consecrate, you must attend, you must concentrate, you must be really present with something. So the puja requires so much precision, so much concentration that it creates consecration. And if you do this repeatedly, it will change the structure of reality around you. As if a heavy body, a massive body. I'm not calling you fat, ma, but you are. That heavy body. In a hymn, it says she's big bodied, lambodara in one thing, containing the whole universe. But like she's heavy. There's a mass to her. And of course, she is the mass of blissful consciousness. But when you worship her in the house, that all pervasive samashti becomes vyashti, the mass of all pervasive blissful consciousness becomes embodied, becomes felt in the stress point called the image or called the yantra. So that's the first thing you're going to need. To do Kali Puja, the first thing you'll need is to have an image of Kali. And that's why it's very exciting because when you come, you'll see that right now, like, Vijaya is on it. She's right now like working on the image of Mother Kali. And of course, you have to take dust from the prostitute's house, the sex worker's house, and then put that dust into the image. And it must be made in a particular way. But then that image is so important because without that image, arguably we couldn't perform Kali Puja. And in our Hollywood tradition, when we were doing the Kali Puja as early as the 30s, and we argue it's the first time Kali is worshipped in the West publicly, as far as we know, Swami Prabhavanandaji, who is the disciple of Swami Brahmananda, our Parampara Guru, he first worshipped Kali in a picture, like, and it's still, the picture is there, like you can see that picture. And you might have seen that picture. It's a beautiful picture, and you can worship Mother Kali in a picture. That's perfectly fine because that would qualify as an image. Vigraha could just be a two-dimensional picture. And so often when people are like easing into Kali Puja, the first thing that they will get is a picture because anything else seems a bit too dramatic, So we purchase a picture or we receive a picture from somebody, we frame it, we put it up maybe, and now we do our worship to the picture. And that's wonderful. That's all well and good. Also, Dressa, nice to meet you, Ma. It's so nice to meet you today, Jaima. Thank you for coming, Jaima. Laura, Ma, and Dressa, Ma have really good lighting. It's like all these like different, like Matangi lights and there's Kali lighting, and it's all very cool. So this idea that you can have a picture of Mother Kali and you could worship her in the picture, no problem. But I think this is a weird and important point. Swami Prabhavananda once had a dream. They were worshiping the picture, and then in the night, the story differs as per the telling. In some accounts, Swami Brahmananda, his guru, came. In another version, Kali herself came in the dream. And whichever you want, whichever account you prefer, you can have, because the same thing, ultimately, Guru and God are one. So God in the form of the Guru or God as the Guru came and said, worship me in an image. She's saying, picture is fine, but I want a murti. I want a statue. Like she wants, like, arguably you could say, she's a spirit. I'm going to lapse into a more folk understanding. We already talked about the most refined, absolute non-dual philosophical view, and we will in just a few moments. But just allow me for a few moments to speak our heart, to speak from a more folk point of view. What in the West you might call a pagan point of view from the Christian sense of, or from, not in the pejorative sense, but in the sense of worshiping deities in a almost, I dare I say, polytheistic way, as if each deity has its own personality. Hinduism has never, I would argue, been polytheistic, but it doesn't exclude the possibility of relating to Kali in that way. So anyway, from that point of view, if you'll allow me, it's like a spirit called Kali wants to have an Annabelle doll or something to possess in order that she may like move about in this world on our plane. Think of it in that way. So she came to Swami Prabhavanandaji, I would argue, to like ask for some Annabelle type doll. She's like, give me something that I can get into. And in our Kerala, in the Malayali sense, this body will do. Like you can give her this body. But you could argue harder sometimes for her to enter into the body. Only a very special kind of person will be able to take that vibration, will be able to like conduct Kali. This Avesha tradition is very important. And we'll come to that. That's the second part of what I want to say regarding Kali Puja and Kali Sadhana. But this first part I think is important. There's this sense that Kali is an energy, a presence, a spirit, but a sort of intangible in the sense that it's not material, but also very real. So not to say intangible in that not real, but intangible in that not non-material presence. But she requires arguably material. Not that she does, but she likes, you could say, she likes material in order to more fully engage with this realm. And that's what she wants to do. The purpose of Kali Puja is to make available on the material plane that spiritual reality, which is always there, but perhaps unperceived or not yet perceived. So you need to give her something that she can possess. So the sculpting of the image is very important. And then the image is immersed. So we recognize that formless consciousness, which we can define as the energy of God, Kali, we say that Kali can go into the image, but she also equally delights in leaving the image. So at the end of the puja, we immerse the image and then she jumps back into Mahakala, into his embrace for sexual union. We say Mahakala Kama Kula Kali Kayam. She's always desirous of returning into union with her Lord. Now, when she separates, she can appear in form, the world appears, but she's eager. Kala Kama Kula Kali Kayam. She's ever eager to return to his embrace, which you could say is the argument of like going from form to formlessness. But in Kali Puja, we'll start with going from formlessness into form. We're calling into form that formless energy called Kali. And this is, I think, the real blessing of puja. It puts God in the room with you, like actually. So an image is required. So therefore, we say a picture is nice, but you could say there's only so much you can do with a two-dimensional. She can do anything she wants, but you could say, like, from this folk point of view, um, giving her an image is very interesting. A statue, So you might want to start there. Like to begin your Kali Puja journey, you would set up an altar, and on that altar, you would put a picture at least, if not a murti, a vigraha, statue of Mother Kali. Any kind of statue will do, whichever one you love. And yeah, you could say if you have a dhyana mantra for Dakshina Kali, you could try to find a statue that is more specifically Dakshina Kali. But I don't think the purpose of the statue is to give her a medium through which to move. Then that thing will blink and speak and move her arms and walk around. Like that's the thing. Like it can come to life. It does come to life. And that's the purpose of Purasharana. What is Purasharana? To make the spirit moving. Purusha Charana. I've told you that wonderful story where Sri Ramakrishna's Tantric Guru Bhairavi Brahmani, she was walking out of the temple, and Bhairavis usually have Bhairavas. The tantric sadhu is usually a paired sort of thing. It's like Bhairava and Bhairavi. They go together, carrying their tridents, wandering in the cremation ground, but they're partnered. So what is a Bhairavi without a Bhairava? It's like kind of like it's not seen. So Mathur, Sri Ramakrishna's attendant, didn't like Bhairavi Brahmani because he thought that she was trying to turn Ramakrishna into her Bhairava. And by the way, things get complicated because sometimes Bhairava Bhairavi pairs aren't necessarily married, and if they're householders, there might even be a wife or husband in the picture, and yet there is a Bhairava or Bhairavi. So there's a kind of like relational anarchy almost to this kind of world of Tantra in the Bengali Gaudiya sense. So Mathur is naturally quite afraid that Sri Ramakrishna is going to end up with this woman and like become a Bhairava, her Bhairava, and she would control him, etc. So he didn't like Bhairavi Brahmani, Sri Ramakrishna's tantric guru, or he had problems with her. So he would tease her and make jokes about her. So she was walking out of the temple, and to tease her, he said, "Hey, Bhairavi, where's your Bhairava, huh?" Like just point out that like, oh, you don't have a Bhairava. It's kind of dodgy, isn't it? Or almost to call her authority into question. Hey, you wander around covered in red or black, carrying a trident. You're a tantric sadhu, tantric priestess. Where's your Bhairava? And then she turned around. She pointed into the temple, pointed towards Shiva at Mother Kali's feet, almost to imply that she's one with the deity. She's Kali. She pointed back and she said, "There, my Bhairava is there." But Mathur, he's very clever. He was not to be outdone. He said, "Oh yeah, well that's not moving." And then the line that she says next is chilling, beautiful line. She defines what a Bhairavi truly is. And I'll just define this as like priestess of Kali. She says, what kind of Bhairavi? Remember, Mathur said, it's not moving. It's acharana. It's not moving. She said, what kind of Bhairavi would I be if I could not make the unmoving move? It's a remarkable claim that the purpose of sadhana, of spiritual practice, is to see in the seemingly material, inert world that non-material spiritual essence. So Purusha means spirit. So Purasharana, you can think of it as, if you want, Purusha Charana, which means to make the spirit move. What is the spirit here? Again, you can think of it in refined philosophical terms. The Sankhyan idea of Purusha as the witness, or Purusha understood in the Advaita Vedanta or Tantric non-dual sense of Brahman or Bhairava. You can do that. But here I'm saying it's the spirit, the energy of Mother Kali, the spiritual power. And that spiritual power is brought into the image, so the image is imbued by and moves as a result of it. So that's the purpose of puja, to make the image move. So there's a kind of externality to it. You can't deny that Mother Kali is on the altar and you're looking at her and you're relating to her as an external person. And we should start there. So I'm always very reluctant to throw out rituals at the beginning because we live external lives. We live lives oriented around form. So often when we say we don't think of God in form, is just hypocrisy. Look at all the people who claim to believe in a formless God. If you look into their minds, the mind is filled with forms. Those forms are just lunch and news and grudges and like desires, like all these forms, but they're not necessarily forms of God. Again, I'm not talking philosophy here. I'm talking on a different level, at a practical level, relative level, I would say. Not to say philosophy isn't practical, but you know what I mean. So if the mind must think of form, let it think of Mother Kali's form. If we must relate, let it relate to Kali. And if we must be external, and indeed we must, many of us are rooted here in this material plane, try as we might to be defined in other ways. then might as well relate to Kali in a material way, in an external way, in a relational way, like you would relate to another person. So we would say, um, Kali is not a concept. She is not a coat hanger upon which you could hang any of your conceptual structures. She could be that. That's one way. Again, I said there's a Jungian sort of archetypical way of looking at these goddesses. It's just, I think, not true to our scripture. And that's my claim, that there is a tradition here that prevents us from like just making our own claims, which are valid, but must be checked and balanced by the peer-reviewed, corroborated, lineage-based transmission. So that's the check and balance. We say, like, in the tradition, Kali is understood to be, you could say, many different things, but primarily here in this context, a spirit, a presence, which can be seen and spoken to in a very real and tangible way, more than just a voice in the head, more than just a stirring in the heart, which is valuable. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dismissing that. But there's a surety to it, a conviction to it that feels like how we're now speaking, and that's the purpose. And that could come through the murti. It can come, of course, through the dream or mystical experiences, but there must be a tangibility. And the purpose of puja is to bring that about. So that's why we do puja. And to start, we should get an image or maybe a statue. Often we say we should put that statue on an altar to the north. So we're looking to the north. Almost you could say she's in the Himalayas looking south. Dakshina Kali, by the way, means something like the southern Kali. You can make geographical points about this, but I won't, because she's worshipped all over India. She's a pan-Indian phenomena. She's worshipped in Nepal. She's worshipped in Tibet. So she's beyond just what is politically defined as India. She's a South Asian, all-pervasive presence. Like, she is Dakshina Kali, not just because she's in the south, but you could say she looks south, because you could say the god of death is in the south and she subdues death, or she's Dakshina because she gives boons, or she's southward facing because she's in the Himalayas looking south. In any way, shape, or form, Dakshina Kali is like Dakshina Murti, who is visualized as being in the north facing south. Dakshina Murti means southward facing. So Dakshina Kali also has the same connotation. That being said, we worship her in the north. And I guess I should clarify, the deity that we worship is Dakshina Kali, specifically. I mean, don't get overly complicated here. It's just Smashana Kali, relax. Dakshina Kali is Smashana Kali. I've never met a Kali who is not Smashana Kali. You're like, what? Like, there is Smashana Kali and there is non-Smashana Kali? I mean, come on. Like, show me one dhyana mantra for Dakshina Kali that does not mention the Smashana. Look, you cannot have Kali without the Smashana. Stop trying to get death without death. Stop trying to get time without impermanence. Stop looking for a Smashana Kali that's like edgier or more goth than Dakshina Kali. Do not buy the propaganda that Dakshina Kali is somehow a more like householder form. Householders, be warned. Bring Dakshina Kali into your home and see what happens. Just try it and see. I'm saying do it. I'm a householder who does it. I'm encouraging other householders to do it. But don't play around. Don't think this is, oh, a householder is so sweet, so cute. Kali is Kali Baba. And I'm saying that's because she is her own person. She's not the person that you want her to be. Of course, a mother will try to, accommodate her children. That's part of what makes God merciful. But that doesn't dismiss her personality. So we could say that Dakshina Kali is as Kali will be. And the mantra that we're going to use for the puja, what you're going to learn in this puja padati, in this ritual manual, which we argue you should learn to the T because of all the points I was making earlier, the mantra will refer to as Dakshina Kali. So Kali, but specifically we understand it to be Dakshina Kali. If this is not pleasing to you, if for whatever reason you don't want to worship Dakshina Kali, you would rather worship some other Kali, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You'll have to go and look for a different lineage, because the fact of the matter is, the Kali that we worship, the Kali that was realized in our lineage, the Kali whose energy that flows through the lineage, we call her Dakshina Kali. Her name is Dakshina Kali. Her mantra has that name. And throughout the puja, there's this puja mantra, which you're going to be using throughout the whole puja. And it's to Dakshina Kali. So let me start with that. The reason it's complex to teach puja, let me just get into this now, is because we often argue in the tradition that puja requires diksha. And diksha is a very personal, intimate process that's not necessarily a big public thing. It's usually one-to-one. And it's very, very intimate, very private, and it requires a lot of like testing on behalf of the student and the teacher. So remember how I said earlier, like the proper selection of teacher is all important. And therefore we have to understand the scriptural requirements for a teacher. Is it someone with a big following? We said good PR is not necessarily good teaching. Is it somebody who has a lot of charisma? No, a lot of presence and performance ability is not necessarily a good teacher. What makes a good teacher? For that, we must look at the tradition's own understanding of a teacher. Otherwise, don't look for a teacher within this tradition. If you want a teacher based on your own metric, look for teachers outside of this tradition. I think the problem is that there are a lot of teachers who represent this tradition who are not willing to live up to the very definition of the teacher in the tradition. And the very basic definition is Shrotriya. Avijana, Akamahata. And I'm focusing on that word Shrotriya now. Of course, there are these other two words we can analyze, but Shrotriya means knower of the scripture, someone who knows the text. Shrotriya. So before we accept mantras from people, before we accept them as our guru, we should be very careful. When we saw Swami Vivekananda teach, he didn't just say what he thought, he represented the scriptures, and he was very careful to, like, in Sanskrit, cite his sources, point his students to the scripture, like, be accountable to the scripture. And he didn't just teach his own thing, he taught all the various interpretations. He taught Ramanuja, he taught Shankara, he taught of course, Madhava even, but less common. But he taught the various scriptures as per the various different interpretations. Some of them he might not even have agreed with, but that he was willing to represent anyway. I think that's a very responsible way to approach things. So it's not just your own agenda or your own teaching. It's never my teaching. It's the tradition's teaching and various different flavors within it. So we say Shrotriya means at the very least we should expect our teacher to know something of the scripture or be able to point us to the primary literature and be willing to, like, be called out on it, be willing to, like, defend their position, because at no point should what the teacher say contradict what's there in the scripture. It's the first thing, Shrotriya. So the selection of a teacher is a very intimate process. It can take years and years and years to find the right teacher, or it can be instant, and it depends on our understanding of what that teacher looks like. But then vice versa, the teacher also must test. So the teacher can't just be like, oh, here's a mantra, everyone, you're initiated. It's not like that. The relationship is a personal one. So arguably in our tradition, things have changed a lot over the years since, the commercialization of all of this. And that's not altogether to blame. But now it's harder to have a personal teacher. Like a teacher might give a mantra, but that's just such a big group. The teacher might have so many disciples that maybe you don't really get to see that person. And arguably that might not have been the traditional way of things. Because you might want to have a follow-up or a relationship. As you grow, as your teacher grows, that's a growing dynamic between the two of you. So there's a testing on behalf of the teacher, but there's also a testing on the behalf of a student where the teacher has to carefully think, is this student, for lack of a better word, worth my time? Like, is this person really, like, qualified? By qualified, I don't mean, do they belong to a particular caste? Are they a particular age or gender? None of those things matter. They could be 8, they could be 80. They could be purple or they could be brown. They could be white or they could be yellow. It doesn't matter at all what biological gender or biological sex or whatever. Like, there are other metrics in other traditions that exclude people on the basis of gender or even intellectual understanding. None of that matters. The only thing that can discern and distinguish between the fit recipient of this tradition and one who is merely a dilettante or the spiritual tourist is clarity, singleness of purpose, and a sort of quality seemingly hard to define, but we just call it Shaktipata. There must be a turning of the heart towards God. Like, there must be a sense of real interest, of genuine devotion. And when that is assessed, I just call it sincerity. When sincerity is assessed, the teacher becomes arguably excited. The teacher feels like this is someone who can really learn, someone to whom the tradition can be transmitted. Otherwise, it's going to fall on deaf ears. You'll only hear in it what you want to hear in it, because God has not come and emptied you out enough to be able to. If you say you have everything, if you know everything, you're a full cup. You can't take in new things, So when we approach the teacher, we actually approach. I did a lecture some time ago called "How to Approach the Guru," and we make the claim it's really a delicate surrender of just like, I know what I know, but I'm going to put that aside and just be willing to receive what you know. I'm going to be willing to take into my being that tradition that you have taken into your being by virtue of what you have received from your guru. And that's why a good teacher is responsible here to give what the tradition has given, not what they want to give. So the integrity of the transmission and the one to whom the transmission is given, that is our highest concern. So notice, that's why mantra diksha is so difficult, because it should be, arguably, we would say, a personal process. In one text, it says 6 months. Like, that's the minimum time required. And of course, that these days, you have to take into consideration maybe past lifestyle. There are a lot of ways you can interpret that. But basically, 6 months could just be, give it some time. The instruction here could just be like, don't jump into something too quickly, for both the teacher and the student. Because there can be excitement on both sides, but sometimes that can lead to maybe not really carefully checking. Are the boxes checked? Is the teacher a knower of scripture? Are they truly, to some extent at least, making progress? And more importantly, are they doing it for the right reasons? These are all things that the texts tell us about what a teacher looks like, among other things, of course. And the student too. You can read all of this in Bhakti Yoga. Swami Vivekananda has many, many passages on the need for a guru. That's very important, because we can dismiss that altogether. The need for a guru, the need for the qualities of a student, the qualities of the aspirant, and of course, very importantly, the qualities of the teacher. When all of this is seen to, then only Diksha can be given. So as you can see, it's a rather intimate and maybe even time-consuming process. Therefore, it's hard to learn puja because to learn puja, the ritual and technical application of mantra for the worship of Kali, you probably have to first get Diksha. Access to puja is usually, in many cases, contingent upon Diksha. And because it's so hard to get Diksha, it's so hard to learn puja. And not, Robert Subodhaji makes a really good point actually in one of his books. He says, while things, I'm paraphrasing, while things might be easily attained, they're not so easily understood. So although everything is available on the internet, it's quite difficult actually to actually apply it because even though you can get it, it might not be yours. You might not earn it. And you'll see if you approach things without this systematic sort of adhikari, we say, qualification, it will be very difficult to learn. And even if it's easy to get the information, very difficult to apply. There might just not be that shakti to take what you know into action. So that's why we say, like, some might be superstitious, but there's something to this that we take Diksha, we receive a mantra, we receive the empowerment of the lineage, and then not only do we have access, perhaps for the first time, but we maybe prior to this had access, but for the first time, our access means something. We might actually be able to do something with what we know. So that's why it's hard to learn puja, and it's kind of taboo actually to teach puja publicly because it is an intimate process. Each mantra is given in Diksha, like every puja mantra is a mantra. Even the Upanishads, oh my God, up until recently, to learn the Upanishads required Diksha. You had to do a special kind of homa, it's called the Viraja Homa. And after Viraja Homa, only then did you have the adhikari to study Advaita Vedanta, because the text in which we find the teaching, the Upanishads, and Swamiji said, I only ever taught the Upanishads because it's good and universal. Arguably, those texts should only be taught after Diksha. So what then did Swamiji do? He came and he taught those texts to anyone, anywhere. But also, it was very important to him that, like I said earlier, he had small groups of people that he was able to like really ground the teaching in. So he wanted to make everything available, and that's how it is now. And I think that's what I like. I like that everything is available, but just because everything is available doesn't mean the structure of intimacy, of initiation, of secrecy suddenly goes away. So there might be a mantra available on the internet. My claim is that for that mantra to work, I would argue it's better you receive it in the context of Diksha. And Diksha must be intentional. The teacher must intentionally give it, we argue, and the student must intentionally receive it. Kabir Das and his Diksha might be an exception. There are always exceptions to the rule, but that doesn't deny that like the text have something to say about these things. And we would say, trying to represent the text to our best, to the best we can, it is important that the teacher intend to give and the student intend to receive, and this can be incredibly ritualistic. It could be a very detailed procedure of mantra Diksha, but that then gives the student access to the Padati, the ritual manual, which the student will then use to engage in a serious practice of Mother Kali, which, like I said earlier, has an external form as puja. You're trying to bring Mother Kali into the image, into the material plane, you could say. There's that sense. So that's there, but there's also the homa. We learn how to do fire ceremonies as part of our puja practice. And then there's the tarpana, the marjana, and of course, all of that together, we can learn purasharana, how to actually systematically apply the mantra that we were given, which has its auxiliaries as puja, as homa, as all these things. This whole thing is called tantric sadhana. And I would argue that Sri Ramakrishna practiced this and successfully got access to the divine, having received a mantra from a guru in a lineage. We don't hear very much about his guru, but it doesn't deny that he had one. Even Jesus had a guru. We'd argue John the Baptist initiated him, looking at it through a Hindu lens, a kind of tantric lens. We could say Buddha had a guru. Even the Buddha who argues to be your own guru, he had a guru yoga tradition. Like in the Buddhist tradition, there's a guru yoga tradition. So even though the Buddha says be your own guru, look at how the West interprets that. The individualistic West says, oh, then there's no one who has an authority over me. I will interpret the Buddhist scriptures, which I've never read in the original language, however I want. And who can say otherwise? I'm the boss. I get to sell to others what I think Buddhism means, and Buddhism has nothing that they can say about it because they're all over there on that side of the world, and they have no access to the markets that I have access to, so that I can sell their stuff without ever once taking the time to understand it or learn it in the traditional way. So the claim here is that even Buddhism, both Southern and Northern Buddhism, which in many cases would point to the Buddha's final teaching, be a lamp unto thyself, Atma Dipo Bhavati, even there's a guru tradition. Like, what would you make of that? Like, you can't point to the Buddha and say, oh, he said I'm my own guru, when in Buddhism, it's important to have a guru. So we would argue then that Guru Yoga is one of the central features of our tradition. Where was I going with this? And so, yeah, like, that's why it's hard to teach puja, because to access the mantras, it requires guru and diksha and whatnot. So Nowadays, it's nice to have all of this available. So I'm doing my best. And of course, my guru himself told me I could do this. I asked him, is it okay if I teach puja to a wider audience beyond just those who have received Diksha, just like the world? I mean, I'll put them on YouTube, I'll put them out there for anybody to find. Is that okay? He said, yes. As long as somebody is sincere, they should have all the tools. So presenting the tools is not a problem, but sometimes what is easily accessed is not necessarily easily earned. So although we're going to try to make everything as freely and publicly available as possible, maybe not everything. Some things might still need Diksha, but I would argue as much as possible as can be given, we should just put it out there because it's our shared property and everyone has equal access to it. But I hope that doesn't mean we like don't take Diksha. I mean, like it should still be something that you're interested in, and maybe not. I mean, like to put all this out there is to imply that there in some cases, rare cases, but cases nonetheless, it will be enough. Just to have somebody like access this material, they maybe from past lives. I don't know. Like it's always possible that there are exceptions. So this stuff should be made available, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take mantra. So that mantra diksha. Therefore, it's hard to teach puja because it requires a lot of mantras. So let's start with this. What I'm going to do next is not diksha. Okay, this thing right now is not diksha. That's a different thing. But I'm going to present now the central puja mantra of the Kali Puja Padhati. Insofar as we're learning to worship Mother Kali, the central deity is Kali, and the Bija mantra for Mother Kali, of course, there are many different Bijas for Mother Kali, but the Bija mantra for Mother Kali can be seen throughout the whole puja. So it's like even in previous sections, like in the preliminary purifications, like when you're purifying the alphabet, if you're worshipping, say, Saraswati, that might look like ang, aing, ang, ing, aing, ing, ong, aing, ong, right? Like the bija mantra that is nested between the it's different. But with Kali, it might be something like ang kring ang, kang kring kang, chang kring chang, tang kring tang, tang kring tang, pang kring pang, yang kring yang, shang kring shang. So like notice the cream that appears in between all of these letters, that's consistent throughout because it's Kali Puja. And so even when you're doing Nadi Shodhana, which is one of the things that we learn in the puja, when you're breathing through alternate nostrils, you're keeping count with maybe your fingers, but your count is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually cream, 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 cream. Like you're using the bija mantra to keep count actually, even as you do Nadi Shodhana. So whether it's Nyasas or various other mantras, Om Kream Pat, like all these mantras that you see throughout the puja, they are influenced actually by the central deity to whom you are performing puja. And if the central deity is Kali, then her mula, her bija, will be pervasively present throughout the whole puja. Therefore, you have to have access to that bija, which arguably is only really given in Diksha. It's the bijas, arguably, that make mantras Diksha mantras. And that's why studying Kali Puja is quite difficult because you need Diksha. Okay, so when you come to the Padhati, you'll see, especially in Kali Puja, there is a consistent mantra that flows all throughout. Like I just said, there is a consistent bija that flows all throughout. And by the way, this bija alone would be enough to begin Kali sadhana. You could just do mantra japa with this bija, just the bija. Many people do that. A lot of people take Diksha into the Kali tradition and they just get this bija. Like this is a perfectly legit mantra in and of itself, just as a bija, without Om or without Nama or without the Namaha, just the pure bija, cream. That bija represents Mother Kali, among other bijas, but mainly her mula, her central bija is cream, cream. And throughout the puja, you're going to see a consistent repetition of this mula mantra, cream, cream, cream. Even in the preliminaries, like when you're purifying the body and the implements and the material around you and within you, there's this mantra, cream. So that's the mantra, of course. Now, we often say these bijas, these various vibrations like Aim or like, again, these are often not spoken out loud. Although in this context, treating it like kind of intimate, closed context, we're saying this mantra. And these are bijas are very sacred. We don't say, by the way, just don't say them out in public. They don't walk around and be like, just suddenly shout the bija mantra. It's like, no, it's to be treated with reverence. Therefore, we only really say bijas when in Diksha or when in puja, or maybe now, if you don't mind, like in a kind of academic sense. But otherwise, to be polite, we refer to bijas by code words. So if I say Kriya Bija, I mean cream. Or if I say something like Shrishti Bija, I might mean Aim. Or if I say something like Kama Raja Bija, no, that's something like Kama Bija, I might mean clean. Or if I say Lajja Bija, we might mean Harim. And you'll see all of these bijas appear all throughout the text. There's Aim, there's Harim, there's Kleem, as you might see in the Navarna. There's, of course, various others, like there's Sahu, very important bija, like I am attributed to Para, to Shrishti Shakti. And on another occasion, I'd love to sit down with you and like just walk you through a very complex and I think refined presentation of why the bijas are what they are. Not to overly intellectualize them, but you can understand a lot about bijas when you understand like through ha, understanding how is prakasha, is ananda, like how and are paired. How E is Icha, how E is Ishana, like all in chapter 3 of Tantra Loka of Abhinava Gupta, we learn this phonetic mysticism where each sound in the Sanskrit syllabary has its power, its potency. They are matrikas, little mothers, through whose mouths the world is spoken into existence, if you will. So matrikas, they are bijas, like all the sounds of the Sanskrit alphabet, I, ra, ra, la, la, a, I, o, au, ang, aha. Those are all the vowels, 16 of them. They are bijas. And of course, there are the consonants, ka, ka, ga, ga, nga, cha, cha, ja, ja, nya. These are all sets, 5 sets of sets of 5 that are gutturals and palatals and dentals and labials. Like it walks you through the whole system of sounds. But these 49 sounds, through ha, and you could also add a ksha if you want, the 50th sound. All of those are the primordial building blocks for every mantra you're going to encounter in this tradition. And that's why we spend so much time together, you guys, just discussing linguistic mysticism. So coming back to Cream, that is of course composed of the matrikas, ka, ra, E, and of course the Anuswara, the Bindu it's called. So Cream is described as the word Karpura, camphor, modified in this way with the Vamakshi, which means E, along with the Ardha Chandra, the half moon, or the Bindu, which means Ang. So Ka, and then Karpura, you get Kra, and then you get E with the Vamakshi. Like in the Karpuradi Sutram, there are very complex ways to describe and sort of elliptically and obliquely and secretly give this mantra, this Cream mantra. But don't get me wrong, although it's the bija from Mother Kali, its phonetic powers can be traced to the Matrika or to the Malini order. So, by the way, in Kaula Puja, when you're doing Kaula Yaga, you have to be really, really tight on your matrikas and your malinis because there the mantra is all the letters actually. You're using e, like using all the whole thing is being said as a mantra. And therefore, you're saying, actually, technically, you're saying all the mantras because all the mantras that ever were, will, and are have their roots in these matrikas, these foundational, primordial 50 or maybe 49 or 50 phonemes vibrating constantly in reality, from which reality pours forth. So, just as an aside, it would be good right now, I can tell you right off the bat, for those of you who are interested in Kali Puja, it would be good to start familiarizing yourself at least with Matrika. Later we'll do Malini, but at least with Matrika, which is a particular way of arranging the Sanskrit alphabet. Malini is when you arrange the Sanskrit alphabet starting with Na and ending with Pa. That's a particular way of the arrangement. And I like Malini because, of course, it's central to the Malini Vijaya Uttara Tantra, but it's complex insofar as the vowels, the E, is mixed in with the consonants. It's an order of Sanskrit phonetic structure where everything is mixed up. The energies of masculine and feminine are all mixed up. Whereas Matrika, the vowels are put to one side. The 16 vowels are understood as their own kind of cordoned off unit, and then there are the others. So 16 plus the others makes up 49 or 50. So like you have the bijas and you have the vowels, but understanding that and learning how to say it front and back will help us a lot. So we should be able to go from ang all the way to kshang, but also backwards, right? Like shang, hung, like going backwards. Lung, so shang, lung, wang, sang, shang, shang, like wang, lung, rang, yang, bhang, like bang, bhang, bhang, like that, going backwards and going forward, what is called the Anuloma Viloma or Shrishti Sanghara Kramas. So being able to say your alphabet, interestingly, in Sanskrit, forward to back and backward to front is going to be really, really important because these are the basic building blocks of mantras. So if we want to interact with mantras in a very deep way, I would argue we should start interacting with their component parts, the bijas, which we encounter in Matrika and Malini order. So coming back to the mantra now, while all the bijas are phonetic powers within Kali, the energy signature, which I think most captures her, or at least as per the Padati, is this Cream bija. So Cream is her bija. Technically, Hreem is her bija, Hom is her Shakti, and Cream is a Kilaka. So if we want to be very precise, Cream is not quite the bija. I mean, like, let's be even more esoteric here, if you don't mind. Cream, I don't think, as per our Rishyadi Nyasa mantra, is the bija mantra for Kali. It's just the Kilaka. And think about a door. For a door to turn, there must be a peg. And so when you turn the door, it turns on a peg, right? Like it goes. So that peg that allows the door to turn is called a kilaka. Some people translate as nail, something that holds things together. So what holds the energy of Kali or the Kali Puja or even the Kali mantra together is that kilaka. Though the Rishadi Nyasa tells us that her Shakti is home actually. Home, the power of Kali is in that Bija mantra, home. And again, which is called the Kurcha Bija. And then again, these things are, I'm speaking of them more openly than I think we ought to, because these things, I don't mean to like transgress in the sense of losing reverence for these things. They're to be spoken of very delicately and intimately. And therefore, sometimes you don't say it out loud. You say, oh, kurcha. But just because many of you are coming to this for the first time, let's just explain what kurcha means. Kurcha means bundle, but it just refers to the way that the ha looks with the u sound. So it's an orthographic morphological point about how the mantra home is written in Sanskrit. And so therefore we say it's kurcha, it's the bundle mantra. So if you have home, that's her Shakti. Technically, her bija, according to this Rishadinyasa, is the Lajja bija, or the Hrit bija, or the Maya bija, the Devi bija, which is Hreem. So this word bija, I think, can be confusing because it can be distinguished from a Shakti, from a Kilaka. We don't need to get into it too technically today. I think it's enough just to say that Cream is the central energy that holds the whole puja together, holds the whole mantra together. Swami Bhajan Ananda Saraswati at the Kali Mandir in Laguna Beach, he makes a beautiful point. It's like a pin in a grenade. Like you pull the pin out, only then the grenade will explode. So the puja will only work, the mantra will only work if you have this pin, or maybe if you pull the pin. And to pull the pin, in order for Kali to explode and destroy all your samskaras and your samsara, you need to say this mantra, and it's there throughout the puja. So Kreem, that's the bija. Now, all the matrikas from all the way through ksha, from which come all the bijas like Hreem and like Hum and like Kreem and like etc. All of them we say rest in Om. Right? All these bijas, you could describe them all with the mantra Om. So in one sense, Om is like the Maha Bija. It's called the Pranava. I don't think you can even call it a bija. It's just a primordial vibration in which all these like sounds or energies arise. So again, let's go to Swami Vivekananda in Bhakti Yoga, where I was telling you earlier, he offers all the qualifications of gurus, all the qualifications of disciples. He's very clear about what integrity looks like in a lineage and why you would even need a lineage. There are a lot of stuff there about preliminaries to spiritual life. But in that book, Bhakti Yoga by Swami Vivekananda, he gives a long talk on Om, on sound as symbol, word as symbol. And there's a very sophisticated understanding of Om. In the Mandukya Upanishad, of course, that's the Upanishad par excellence for understanding Om. So if you want to learn about Om, see the Mandukya Upanishad. And Mandukya has only 12 mantras, and therefore you need to take it with commentary. So usually we take it with Gaudapada, and then Gaudapada we take with Shankara, Shankara we take with Anandagiri, so a commentary on a commentary on a commentary on like 12 verses. And those 12 verses are so profound because the whole text opens with this claim, Sarva Omkara Eva, everything is verily Om. Om is all that was, Om is all that will be, Om is what is here now. And then over the several verses of the text, everything up to verse 7 is going to describe a few things. Verse 2 will tell you that you are Om, that Soyam, I am that Atman, that self. And then that self has 4 parts. Chatushpat, and then it describes the waker and the waker's world, the dreamer and the dreamer's world, and the deep sleeper and the deep sleep world. But then also in verse 7 is where it gets really interesting. The 4th, there's something beyond the waker and the waker's world, the dreamer and the dreamer's world, the sleeper and the lack of a world. And that is actually wholly present in the world of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's immanent and yet transcendent. And that silence, that space full of energy is called Turiya. And Turiya is the one in which the waker and the waker's world, the dreamer and the dreamer's world, and or ma, the deep sleep and the deep sleep world, they're all in here in that turiya. So there's silence, there's there's and there's ma. And that's what verses 8 through to 12 are going to describe. Having described the waker and the waker's world, the dreamer and the dreamer's world, the deep sleep and the deep sleeper's lack of a world, and having described the one in which these 3 appear in verse 7, then the next part of the text, 8 through 12, in the Mandukya Upanishad is all about describing the mantra Om and then attributing to Om, to the 4 sounds of Om, 3 sounds in the one reconciling silence, and ma, those categories aforementioned. Waker and waker's world to dreamer and dreamer's world to deep sleep and deep sleep world, Pragya it's called, to So the Vedic categories of, if you don't mind, Vaishvanara and Vishva or Virat. There's Taijasa and Hiranyagarbha. So it's been a while since I looked at the text. And of course, Pragya and Ishvara. So the idea of like Vaishvanara, or sorry, Virat and Hiranyagarbha and Ishvara, these are all Vedic words that describe various stages of the world in its physical, subtle, and causal level. And of course, the various stages of the self, whether that's Vaishvanara, Taijasa, or whether that's Pragya, these are all like various ways of understanding the self. The Soyam Chatushpad, the self is four, and the three have to do with the physical, the subtle, and the causal. You can even think in terms of sattva, rajas, tamas, like basically any trinity you encounter, you can plug into Om. But that trinity is held by one. And that one that contains three is what you are. So if you want to learn about Om, Mandukya Upanishad, of course, offers one of the most subtle and sophisticated approaches to Om. It's the Upanishad par excellence for Om. Om. But there's another way of understanding it. And this is how Swamiji approaches it in his Bhakti Yoga. He says, it's like there are these three sounds, at the back of your throat, u in the middle of your throat, and ma in your lips. When you say Om, you've actually expressed as a word symbol all the possible sounds that the throat can make. So if you look at the Sanskrit alphabet, it's arranged in that order. In the back, in the gutturals, ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. Now, you could say all of these sounds without your tongue. You can open your mouth and go, ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. And you can feel it kind of in the back of your throat. That's in And then as you flow up, you get the palatals and the dentals. Cha, cha, ja, ja, nya. Feel that's kind of a little further up in the mouth, just above the throat. Then you get to the center. These are the harder sounds to make. Da, 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 na. The center. And then the dentals. Now it's flowing into the teeth. Da, 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 na. And then it flows into the lips. Ba, 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 ma. So this kind of movement from the back of the throat to the front of the throat. Of course, with the lips closed, you can make sa, sa, with this kind of sibilant sound comes after that. The liquids, yam, rang, lang, vang. So all of that, all the sounds, the matrikas, the malini, the energies of mantras can all be traced back to Om. They're all contained in Om. Just as Om contains all sounds, God contains all things. So if God is consciousness, Sarvam Omkara Eva, it is everywhere in all things, as all things. Could there be a better symbol for God, the all-inclusive reality, than Om, which is the all-inclusive sound? So think of Om as constantly vibrating in this universe. It's called a pranava, and everything emerges from it. Therefore, often when you use a mantra, not always, see, Namah Shivaya is an exception because that's a panchakshari, doesn't really require Om, and 22-syllable mantra, Maharagni, there are of course many mantras, Panchadashi, there are many examples of mantras that don't start with Om. Because Om is implied. You could say Om is just always there. So you could just start a mantra without Om and there'll still be Om. The Hare Krishna mantra, the 16-syllable mantra that is used in Chaitanya's Gaudiya tradition, it doesn't have Om in it explicitly, but the Gaudiya Babas will say you'll hear the resonance of Om within it, vibrating within it as you chant it. So you could just say Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, and you should feel Om. So again, I'm going to say Om is implied, but in the mantra that we're going to use as part of our padati, we'll say Om. So the mantra goes like this. It starts with Om, which hopefully you now understand. Om is that primordial sound, pranava, which contains within it all states, all realities, all trinities, all mantras. Om. Then specifically in Om, there's Kareem. By the way, you guys, you can think of all of this as a mandala, going from the general to the specific. We're trying to contact Kali, who is, of course, Om in its entirety, but a particular energy called Dakshina Kali. So we'll start with Om, and let's zoom in. And Swamiji even talks about these bijas as being various like aspects of Om. So if you're ready, this will be a good time to like kind of sit down and like just take this in, like hold the mantra as a sonic form within you, a vibrating, pulsating energy as it's transmitted through the tradition. It's Om as a primordial bija, pranava, then the bija Kareem. Om, Kareem. Now, having given Om, having given the bija, next we must give the name. But what is the name? Like I said, Dakshina Kali. But for some pretty esoteric reasons, before we say Dakshina Kali, and by the way, we say Kalika for a variety of reasons, but we say Dakshina Kalika. Before we say that name, we say Shrimat. Shrimat means the one who contains within herself all auspiciousness. Shri. This is so important because there is a bit of Shri Vidya here too. The Dakshina Kali, you can trace the Dakshina Amnaya, the southern revelation of Lord Shiva, which of course, Mahatripura Sundari, Lalita, it's all included. So you want that Shri in there too, actually. So when we say the mantra, we add Shrimat in front of Dakshina Kalika. So then it would be Om Krim Shrimat Dakshina Kalika. And then after that, we say Devye. So the word Devi, when rendered into this form, Devye, allows then there to be a Namaha. So Namaha means salutations to, therefore Devi must become Devye. So Namaha, salutations to that goddess who is the holder of all auspiciousness, the southward facing Kali, who I invoke now with the Bija mantra Kreem. So Om Kreem Shrimat Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. There's no reason why you can't say Kalikaye Devye Namaha. You can have Kalikaye agree grammatically with Devye. So the Namaha would apply to Devye. It would apply to Devi and it would apply to Kali. Kalikaye Devye Namaha. It's fine. But as per our Padati and as per what my guru told me, as per what's written, right? Like we say, this is the mantra. It says Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. And of course, that will differ from lineage to lineage, from Padati to Padati. So putting this all together now, Om Kreem Shrimat Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. Om Kreem Shrimat Dakshina, the Na sound is a retroflex. So Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. Om Kreem Shrimat Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. And that energy of that mantra is the central mantra, the Mula mantra, you could say. The Mula is the Bija, Kilaka Kreem, but expanded, that would be Om Kreem Shrimat Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. And to make offerings, we need that mantra. So the offerings are going to be nested in there. And by the way, if you'd like, let me just turn off the recording. I know we want to see it in writing. And of course, a Padati presents mantras in writing. So we'll see that soon. Although often we say mantras which are transmitted shouldn't be written down. Say mantras, if they're written down, lose their power, etc. There's kind of languaging around how we treat a mantra. It should only be held orally. It should be kept secret, etc. But notice, when you come to Kali Puja, when you come to Hollywood, or you go to Laguna Beach, Kali Mandir, or you come here to our apartment and you witness Kali Puja, this mantra is said out loud. And it's said so often throughout the whole puja. Like for Ganesh, when we do puja to Ganesh, we use his mantra and we chant that mantra and then we say, oh, like for instance, I want to give Ganesh a flower. So I might say, Om Gang Idam Sachandana Pushpam Ganeshaya Namaha. Oh Ganesh, I'm giving you this fragrant flower. Om Gam Ganeshaya Namaha. But you might find it as said like this way. Om Idam Sachandana Pushpam Gam Ganeshaya Namaha. So where exactly you put that Idam Sachandana Pushpam, which means this is a fragrant flower, whether it's after the bija or before the bija or before the mantra entirely or after the mantra entirely, that's going to differ from tradition to tradition. So somebody might say, Idam Sachandana Pushpam Om Gang Ganeshaya Namaha. Here is a flower and then the mantra. Somebody else might say, Om Gang Ganeshaya Namaha. Idam Sachandana Pushpam. Samarpayami or something like that. I offer you this fragrant flower after the mantra. Some people will say, Om Idam Sachandana Pushpam Ganeshaya or Gang Ganeshaya Namaha. Others will say, and we say, Om Gang Idam Sachandana Pushpam Ganeshaya Namaha. Don't worry about that if that was too quick. I know some of you have been asking, where exactly do you put the, and this is because we've been doing this puja series for about 3 years now. So this is a bit anachronistic because some of you are just coming in, some of you have been here for a while. So to that question, where do you put the offering? Just know that there's variation. That's why it's likely to be confusing. Because if you look at different padatis, they'll be like, oh my God, this padati says, Om Idam Sachandana Pushpam, Hrim Krim Shrimat Dakshina Kalikaye Devye Namaha. Whereas this Pariti says, Om Krim Idam Sachandana Pushpam Shrima Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. Like grammatically both are fine, and like honestly the order it can be changed. Like, but we go based on our Pariti. And the Pariti that we receive from our gurus says this: Om, Bija, offering, and then the rest of the mantra. So you can see the centrality of the mantra. We can't make an offering even, arguably, without this mantra, which is the vehicle of the offering. To make mantras, to make offerings with mantras and with the right knowledge, with the right bhava is what we call puja, you could say. So this is how you would get started. You would get an image of Mother Kali, you would set up an altar, Mother Kali goes on the altar, and then to perform Kali puja, you would first need this puja mantra. Let's just call it a puja mantra if you want. And the puja mantra for this particular puja to the goddess Kali in her Dakshina Kali form is Om Kreem Shrimat Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. Beautiful mantra. Such a gentle and sweet mantra. So my guru had me do japa of that for quite some time, actually, that particular mantra. When he was first teaching me Kali Puja, that was like kind of the mantra. So this mantra, you might not see it until later in the puja when we get to Kali. Because prior to that, although Kareem is quite all pervasively present, like I said, you worship the Guru and then Ganesh and then you worship Shiva, and like there's a whole set of things that you do. Prior to that, there's Nyasa. Prior to that, there's Bhuta Shuddhi. Prior to that, there are preliminaries. So you might not see this mantra for a while, but once you get into the Kali part of the Padathi, the centerpiece, we would argue, oh my God, where is the. Oh, give me 1 second. The charger. I don't know where I've placed the phone charger. Hmm. Not phone charger. What is it called? Computer, laptop charger. Used to be. Oh, mind. It's in the book bag. Okay. So before this laptop dies, I think it's already ready to go into samadhi. It's like I have this mantra. It's been chanting. It's like it just gave me a low battery thing. It's like, oh my God, the Kundalini is going. It's like leaving. Okay, let me just plug it in. Okay, so now this is what I mean to do with you over the next now and of course next week to prepare you for this big Kali Puja coming up. And because it's the Krishna Paksha or the Kali Krishna Paksha, this waning moon leading up to Shyama Kali Puja, to prepare you for that and to like equip you with the tools to do your Kali Puja, I'm focusing on Kali. So I'm just like skipping into the Kali section, which of course we're going to take our time to learn later too. But this section will feature this mantra a lot. Like it's a ubiquitous mantra that appears all throughout. So it's good to like really have some familiarity with it. You can do some japa with it. It's good to practice it. Now there are some rules from the pronunciation. Like for instance, if the M with the dot above it appears before like a K sound, that M will become more like an NG sound. So say Cream Kali is actually Kreen Kali. Kreen Kali. Why? Because the M with the dot is actually going to change based on what letter appears after it. So if it was like Patanjali, then the M with the dot will become N with that little squiggle sign on top of it. So the M changes. So you can't say like, oh, is it Harim or is it Haring? Well, like anything, it depends on the context. If Harim appears before a word with the K sound, it would be Haring Kali. Whereas if it appeared before something like um, Shakti, it would be Harim Shakti or something like that. It's kind of like how the rule Namah Shivaya, or kind of like how Diyoyo Naf Prachodayat, because Diyoyo Na, but the Prachodayat, that Visarga with the Na combined with the Pa becomes Naf. So Dhyoyo Naf Prachodayat or Namah Shivaya. The Namaha melds with the Sa sound, so like Namah Shivaya. Similarly, the Ka sound after the M with the dot above it, as you'll see in the writing, will make that M with the dot above it a kind of NG sound. So all those rules are like there in Sanskrit because Sanskrit, as Bhairavananda points out often, is the way that sounds are arranged in the most sensible and arguably most powerful and beautiful way. So like I would argue, while it's helpful to learn those rules in order to polish up the pronunciation, and mine is certainly far from perfect, I would go to Bhairavananda for more precision there. But while it is important maybe to learn some of those rules, it is also true that if you just continue chanting, because Sanskrit is supposed to be an intuitive and universal system for language and for sound, these things can be intuited. So as you chant this mantra, you might naturally start to say the Kareem, but as Kareem because of Shrimat. Or if you have another mantra and there's a Kali, you might naturally start to say the Kareem as Kreen with the Kali, Kreen Kali, Kreen Kali, Kreen Kali, Kreen Kali. Just that's the way it will flow within you. So I would say, don't worry, the pronunciation of the mantra will deepen as we take it to town and chant the living daylights out of it. So this mantra can be used, of course, it can be used as a japa mantra, as a homa mantra. It will, by the way, when we start learning homa, the fire ceremony, you'll need this mantra also because this mantra will be used as a homa mantra, except we'll add a swaha, making it a homa mantra. So this mantra is so versatile. It's used for tarpanam, for marjanam, for homa, for all the ritual applications. We use this mantra, this puja mantra. Okay, so this is good to have now to start your puja journey because you'll see when we worship Kali, this mantra is quite ubiquitous. So there it is. Om Krim Shrimat Dakshina Kalika Devye Namaha. Now the worship itself. We'll cover it next time. Right now, all I want next week, I'm gonna walk you through the steps, and we've done this so many times before. Like there's a video out we put how to perform Kali Puja. There's another one called how to worship Kali. There might even be another clickbaity one, which is how to actually worship Kali. Like you know how it is. There's so many videos out there, and we've covered this before. But every year, I hope to add a little more detail. Last year, we put out the Kali worship in 16 steps. Remember, and I always point you to Swami Bhajan Ananda's very wonderful book, Simple Kali Puja, which is how I would get started. Like if you want to start Kali Puja, I think it would be good to get that book. There's a PDF available on their website, Simple Kali Puja from the kalimandir.org, I think. So there, they give you a very beautiful, very complete puja. So you can get the hang of how the mantras flow. There are good translations, some explanation as to why the puja is structured in that way. And it's like kind of like a bare bones, almost like skeletal primordial structure, which you can build up on as time goes by. This is a good place to start. We, of course, made our own version of that, not of that, but it's like adding elements maybe. And of course, as per our Hollywood Padati, there's some differences. So we gave 16 steps. So it was a bit more complex in that it had nyasas and avarana puja and things like that. It talked about Kali's retinue and whatnot. So it's a bit more intimidating, that document. And of course, at the Kali Mandir in Laguna Beach, they have different padatis. They have the beginner one, the intermediate one, the advanced one. So just like that, as you start worshipping Kali, you grow in your ritual refinement. So in the beginning, it's the simplest possible thing. Maybe no mantras, just offer some flowers, light some incense, wave them however you like, light a lamp, and just sit at the altar. Like in the beginning, it might just be a simple bow or a simple, hey, how are you doing kind of vibe. You just sit there and be with Ma. That's enough. Just sitting at the altar, acknowledging Ma, being with Ma. That's puja too. You don't need any mantras, any specific krama, sequence, puja, parati, none of that. Just simplicity and sincerity. But like I said earlier, with regards to Ramakrishna, when we develop deep love for Kali, we long to see her, we long to relate to her in a much more tangible way. And therefore, we're called to do puja. And slowly, steadily, step by step, mantra by mantra, going at our own pace, we start to build our puja. That's an important thing that you don't. I want to give this disclaimer. I mean, this is true of our entire puja class. I mean, like what to say of our puja class in general, but it's also true of just learning to worship Kali. The mantras might not be familiar to you, especially if Sanskrit is still somewhat intimidating. It can be intimidating. The mantras, the order, just the complexity of the puja. It's very easy to get overwhelmed. Because so much information and many of it is you're hearing it for the first time. So in order to I think learn skillfully, it's nice to take your time. There's an urgency. Certainly there's an urgency, but we do it mantra by mantra. We really try to make each piece ours before moving on to the next piece. So that's the way this puja class is structured anyway. We've been really taking our time because we gave that first talk, I think, in 2022 or something. And now it's 2025. So we've been studying and we haven't even gone into the Kali section. We're still in Shiva, right? We're just now finishing some Manasa puja stuff. We just now started talking about Surya. Well, it's we're still very early in the puja. There's so much to go. And I haven't even talked about Trishulabja Mandala and the worship of Para and Para and Apara along with their Bhairava Sadbhava. And there's so much complexity. The 64 yoginis, there's so much to study. And again, it'll just take however long it will take because I don't want to rush ahead and present all this information. Already it's overwhelming, but it's better, I think, to go at our own pace, to watch these videos. They're all recorded. You can watch them again at your own pace. And mantra by mantra, you build your own padati. Just take what mantras make sense to you, leave out what is not immediately applicable, and then later it's going to be there for you. So while we have a community document, and I'm making another one, by the way, for this year, which hopefully will be a little more complicated than last year's 16 Kali Puja, 16 steps, but that's there for you too. So those of you who were practicing last year, hopefully we'll grow together this year, add a few more things. So while that will be available for you soon, hopefully by next week, there will be that document. I think still it's important you have your own document maybe. And from this main community document, kind of an abbreviated padati specifically for Kali, you construct your own padatis based on what is important to you in your puja. It has to be something that you can reliably do every day with joy, with ease, with feeling. It shouldn't be something that so overwhelms you that it deters you from even getting to the mat. If you get anxiety, like puja anxiety, this is so difficult, then that's a problem because that will prevent you from doing the puja. So you want to start with the puja that you actually like to do, that is beautiful and understandable. So like that, we're going to move forward slowly, step by step. We're just going to add one piece after another, one mantra after another, building up the puja. And of course, my purpose now is just to focus on Kali for a little bit. Just going directly into Kali Puja with some preliminaries, but not too many. Just a few preliminaries, Bhuta Shuddhi Nyasas, but specifically Kali Nyasas. So we'll skip the Samanyargya Nyasas. So we'll just go straight into, the Samanya Nyasas mean general Nyasas. We'll skip those. We'll go straight into the Vishesha Nyasa, which means the Nyasa that applies to the Cream Bija or the Cream Mantra or to Kali specifically. So this is going to be a streamlined Padati. To the point, Kali Padati. Of course, it will include retinue and Bhairava and whatnot. So that's our project. So if you don't mind, we'll stop right now. I'll open the floor if anybody wants to practice that mantra or ask any questions about the process thus far. So if you want to start Kali Puja, hopefully these are some of the bhavik or preliminary philosophical concerns. material necessities, like the very basic necessities, maybe a murti, like either a picture or an image, and then this mantra. This mantra is going to be used in a much more elaborate process, which we're going to get into next. So we'll stop there for now. Thank you all so much. I pray that this next 14 days, as we move into Amavasya, will be filled with the bhava, with the presence of Mother Kali, and that by the time we get to Amavasya, we'll be absolutely mad, absolutely saturated with Kali, 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 until the Murti becomes Kali, but more importantly, until this Murti becomes Kali. When the Kundalini rises and enters into the heart, no longer do we identify with the person we used to think that we are. Rather, we start to identify with Kali. And that's why Bhairavi Brahmani, she was able to point back and say, that's my Bhairava. Because through doing tantric sadhanas, she now is Kali. Her name is Bhairavi. Bhairavi is Kali, actually. So when you say I'm Bhairavi, you're saying I'm no longer identifying as a Pashu, as a bound soul. I'm identifying as that goddess which I worship. Kali worships Kali and becomes Kali. And like that, she awakens in the image and she awakens in this clay image too. May she awaken in all of us, in us, as us. Oh, may this be an offering to Kali, who comes in the form of all people. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Jai Man, Jai Thakur. Om Thakur, Jai Man.